Good afternoon, everyone. We are in the committee of the whole meeting of January 23rd. Halton Spalding, Feast Electment, Cosquid Homish, Oamio. Welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. There's an agenda in front of the committee. I'm looking for a motion to adopt the agenda with the amendment to just go to a very quick close at the very beginning of the meeting. Moved by Councillor Carr, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed, if any. I'll entertain a motion to close for legal reasons. Moved by Councillor Pryor, seconded by Councillor Lace. I almost looked at Linda to put her hand up. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We should be not very long at all. Thanks. Welcome back, everyone. We're in our committee of the whole meeting of Tuesday, January 23rd, and we're on number 3.1, which is Nicole Murray, delegation from Squamish Valley Equestrian Association with an emerging opportunity for their association. So I'll pass it over to you, Nicole.
Okay, thank you very much for having us here and listening to our presentation. We've got an opportunity that's just arisen in the last kind of 3 weeks to 1 week, depending on which level of the confirmation that we look at, to have somebody that has recently purchased a horse property that was at 1001 Finch Drive. That was House Sound Stables. They had an indoor cover installed on their property, and that property's just been sold in late November, early December. And the property owner has offered to donate the structure to the horse club. And so there's a whole bunch of quick things that need to happen because that owner is in a little bit of rush to have it removed. And so we've had several meetings with the real estate agent. We've had an email with the owner of the property. We've had a couple of meetings with district staff to see about what the logistics are and timelines involved with permissions of getting the structure moved to the land that we leased from the district, as well as any funding available to have the structure moved over, and also in talks about what we need to do as far as having it reinstalled, because we're currently on a year-to-year lease. And so we're here to ask for help with the permissions on the initial stage of actually having the structure taken down and moved to and possibly stored at the land that we lease. We understand that there would be some permissions required even with the storage, regardless of the putting it back up. And then also some funding, although we've got a last minute, our grant application is in, so you do have the information there. We would have had it sooner had we known that this opportunity was there.
Great. So any questions? So just maybe walk us through a little bit what you've presented here in terms of some of the costs and logistics, maybe, just so we have a better understanding.
Sure. So a little bit about the horse club. We are leasing the land off of the district, and we have 2 outdoor arenas right now, and they're not usable year-round because of snow we get, the ground freezes, and sometimes ice. So not only do people that own the horses can't use the lands, but also for some of us that are coaches and have lessons, some of the kids can't come for their lessons either. So it's unusable for a certain period of time. And we also can't branch out with other community user groups as far as using this land because of it not being covered. And so the cover that's there, we've been given a quote, and I've included it in the package. We have 2 quotes for the takedown and the moving, I guess you would say, the moving of the structure. One was just over $25,000, and one was, I think, $27,000. And then there's some additional costs that we might have to do as far as having a secure storage for it, rather than just having it tarped and kind of laid out on our unsecured land. And we think that not only would this help us as a horse club increase our memberships and the amount of opportunities we can provide as far as clinics and shows and things for our own members, but it also allows us, I think, to branch out more to other user groups that also don't have a cover, like indoor soccer or winter markets or wedding venues. I think there's so many more opportunities. Dog agility. We've been approached by, and it just is, we're so limited by not having a covered area.
Ted.
Thank you. Now, I understand there's lots of people that want to get horses in places, right? Is that area there an ideal location?
I think there's two parts to your question as far as having people have horses. We are being a little bit limited with the amount of development that's going on in the area. That, for example, this one business that had the structure, House Sound Stables, they had the ability to stable 15 horses there. And so the loss of that is 15 horses that have to have gone elsewhere. Some people have moved out of town. Some people have relocated to other stables. The current stabling opportunities in town are getting full, so it is getting fairly tight for either new horses to move to town right now or for people that are moving locations for whatever reasons. The location is a good area in that it still is quite central for quite a few horses in the area. We do have also access for a lot of the kids and the youth that come as far as buses. We're central for a parent that has to drop their child off at soccer or at swimming and then have the other kid come to horse lessons, and so they're not so spread out. I've got a couple of parents that find it difficult if they are going out to Squamish Valley where there are other facilities, because what do they do if they've got other children? So whether it's a matter of childcare or then really that 3 or 4 hour block of their day is kind of limited to that one location. I think as a club we are open to looking at other possibilities. I know that has come up before with council meetings, and one of our priorities would be that we remain fairly central so that there is that access for the kids that do come after school or for professional days, or for the kids that are getting a little bit older and having that responsibility to even come on their own.
Moving us would also incur a bit of quite a major cost. The footing for our rings is not just a dump of sand. It's pretty specialized sand. It would cost probably upwards of $200,000 to redo the footing in a new location, as well as all the fencing.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking, if I may, long term.
Right.
And it's like the gun range. It's slowly becoming part of the neighborhood, and I think, ideally, 5 or 10 acres would probably suit the riding.
Oh, that would be huge, yeah.
And when we looked at the aerial photos of the outdoor soccer fields, there's a proposal to do some things there. Noticing your little ring there, to me, is like, eventually there's going to be a want to expand into that area. And I'm not saying now, I'm just saying, I just wondered if you had any kind of ideas for long-term.
And I think it's a really valuable conversation. I think that what's in front of us today is you guys are being given this gift. This gift comes with some logistics and some cost to just dismantling it, so upfront costs. But it's hard to look this gift in the person mode. Sorry, I have to. So really, I mean, I think that, and when Nicole and I talked last week, you guys are really trying to look to that long-term resiliency and viability and longer-term leases for a location where you can get some security. So, but the choice, the thing in front of council today is the equestrian club is got an opportunity. They have some challenges. Exploring with council where we have the ability to help out with this or not. I'm going to go to Councilor Chappelle or get Neil, our real estate manager, just to talk about lease stuff.
Can I just make one quick response?
Really quick, because I don't want to get into too long.
Okay, yeah, and essentially we are trying to separate this takedown and getting of the structure to whatever happens long term, because we know that evaluation is going on, and we'd love to have land where we can stable horses and everything. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole
other piece.
Immediately, we just want to get it taken down and in our possession.
Yeah, and stored somewhere.
And stored.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the conversation we had is can we store it on our land and can we help with putting it back up? The takedown, I think, would be more of a private conversation, but
well, the takedown costs $20,000.
Exactly.
And
difficult. But I completely agree with you guys that this is an amazing resource to have, and that is our only land, and the amount of lessons and public good that does in that location, and it's only a small piece of land, to have it covered could be it would actually open it up to longer groups.
Absolutely.
Neil, do you want to speak to, I mean, do you want maybe to speak to the lease in terms of, does it need permission from council to store this on the lease?
Sure, Mayor, thank you. No, I mean, basically, if it's not a permanent alteration to the land, that's something we can deal with through the CAO's office. I think the question here today is more around probably the funding and whether or not the council wants to provide the funding.
Okay.
We would go away and do some due diligence on this, look at, any impacts, went through our own internal process, and then we bring it to Ms. Glendale for an answer at that point.
And should they get this facility and should a lease be extended through master plan and stuff, you decide to put it up, there's building department stuff that's all outside of this process. This is just, can we store it on the land? Neil sort of sounds like you're saying yes, they can store it on the land. And then the other piece is, how do you get the money to do this? Do you guys have a strategy for a bit of fundraising on this too? I know because they want it off now, is there a payment plan you can do, or what, how is this?
I think that in the long run, we're fine. We'll be, we will have club members, if it comes to it, who will lend the money to the club in the short term. I did about 6 grant applications yesterday in preparation for all of this. So, we literally just found out this was coming into our hands last Friday. We've known about it for a month, but it was finalized on Friday. So now we're scrambling. We've had preliminary quotes that it would cost about $50,000 to put back up. So that's on top of the $27,000 to take it down. We're not worrying about that at this point. We just want to be able to take it down.
Yeah.
What's the volume of this thing when it's taken down? Is we talking 1 or 2 shipping containers, or how much space does it require?
It comes down into pretty small pieces. All the trusses come down into pieces. The canvas comes down in sections and is rolled up, and everything comes down into quite small pieces. Actually, it doesn't take up a huge amount of space, to our knowledge.
So it could probably maybe go in a shipping container?
Yeah, it would.
Just trying to get an idea.
Yeah, I think those logistics, we don't need to,
No.
yeah. Doug?
Thank you. I just actually, it's more of the ask is $30,000 in the
Yes.
report. Just go to staff, and I'm guessing that this would come, if it was coming by way of a grant
It would be a community grant,
enhancement
yes.
grant, so it would come out of that fund.
Yeah.
Could you remind me, if you can by memory, what our criteria is around community enhancement grants?
Sorry, Doug, I have to ask you to speak this way for the microphone.
Sorry.
So
I don't mind
through
if
the
you
chair,
have to.
speak to me and it'll bounce off me.
Okay,
and
through the chair and the microphone. Could you remind me of our criteria around community enhancement grants?
I will try off the top of my head, otherwise I can bring the policy up in a few minutes if council wants to wait. But essentially you're looking for things that meet council's strategic priorities, nonprofit organizations, membership open to the public, like to the broader public, not sponsorship. Help me out here. Youth.
Yeah.
Exactly. Youth would be
No, I think,
considered.
I mean, in terms of,
economic
this is my
development.
estimation, in terms of just pure criteria, I think this fits. Our deadlines are different, and so this is coming out of sequence from our deadlines because it's an emerging opportunity. And were you asking, Councillor Race, sort of where we were in terms of our policy, in terms of the amount? Or maybe I'm asking that, maybe Doug on that.
Yeah. So right
Where
now,
are we now in terms of,
right now, as I recall, I think we're just slightly over last year's levels. I think we had to raise it about $10,000 to $30,000 over last year. So in terms of impact taxation, this would definitely add a little bit more to your taxation hit for 2018 if you were to add it now. Or you can take it from council contingency.
yeah. I definitely see a greater, as Councillor Chappelle articulated, a greater community benefit beyond the equestrian group. 30,000 is a lot for us to do in a community enhancement grant, just from a quantity point of view. But I would be open to helping out to a certain degree, and I'd like maybe council to explore if they think we can do that, and what amount would that be? Would it be half? Would it be a third? Or how can we at least help to get you there, that you're going, and maybe make the deposit on the removal? And ideally, if the landlord, the new landowner is giving this to you, maybe they can foot the bill, and maybe they'll did my hardest to give it to you,
Yeah.
take it down for you anyway.
Yeah,
We
But-
kind of broached that, it doesn't
Yeah,
sound like
but
that.
either way, maybe
Yeah.
at least lend the money up front and give you a payment option for that.
yeah.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. We've been pulling money out of other areas to fund things that we don't even know what they are, like $50,000. I would see this as a better public benefit than that money, or the economic development, or where we pull that money from. Having a closed arena immediately and being able to take it down and put it up on that space, in particular the therapeutic riding,
It's
to ensure
huge.
that we have that as a public good is immense. So
We even thought the farmer's market could be in there.
tough with horses and people.
It would smell right.
Not at the same time.
Doug?
Yeah, thank you. And so I can see supporting this. I'm going to suggest $15,000 towards it. And what I'm basing that on is kind of the general way we treated other community grant applications, typically not getting 100%, looking for contributions from other sources as well to partner with, and also just the sort of the size of the other grants. And so I'll put forward a motion that we provide a community enhancement grant in the amount of $15,000.
Moved by Councillor Lee, seconded by Councillor Elliott. Councillor Ferrier, have you had a question?
Yes, well, I'm just, so, I think 30,000, I think you'll get it down a lot cheaper than that. You get the thing up, then the district says, oh, so we can use that sometimes too, and we're gonna have soccer players in there, and we're gonna have people doing stuff.
We are getting way off topic.
No, I just
Focus-
wanna know
the-
who's gonna own the thing
The association
We do.
would own the thing.
on our property.
Yeah.
And it's a one-year
It's not a
lease, so
fixture.
there's
On a one-year
conversations
lease.
to be had in the future.
And also the receiving a grant from the district does help us when we go to other grant
Exactly.
applications, because they do look at what else we've applied for, what else we've received. There's a Horse Council of BC gives out fairly large grants, and we're thinking that we would, towards the eventual putting it back up, that we could get 30,000 possibly from them, that they often do for infrastructure, things for clubs.
Horse Council would be, probably our main help.
Awesome. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thank you
much
for your time.
Thank you. Moving on the agenda, we're on 4.1, and we're continuing our growth management workshop. Maybe we'll just take 2 minutes to let everybody settle. We are back in our committee of the whole meeting, and we are on 4.1, which is the growth management workshop, continuation from last week, and we have Matt and Sarah.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I am Matt Gunn, Community Planner here at the District of Squamish.
Sarah McJanet, planner.
We are going to skip quite quickly to where we were last week on the topic of growth management policies for inclusion in the official community plan. But before we do, I have one slide. Since last week, we continue to receive input from the community on this topic. I have done my best to bring that information forward. We have managed to update the numbers of comments that were received through our website comment form specific to our OCP input. There have been other emails that have come in outside of this, and they have not been tabulated into this. We do not have time to do that, but we will do that at a future date. But updating on the numbers from last week, we now have 160 comments that have been referencing a desire to eliminate the 22,500 threshold for limited development in future residential neighborhoods. We have 120 comments requesting elimination of the 34,000 threshold for development in future residential neighborhoods. And just to clarify, virtually all the people who had requested the 34,000 also were people that requested the 22,500 threshold be eliminated, so that is an overlapping group. 81 comments have come in with a request to eliminate specification for small portions of limited development in future residential neighborhoods under specific circumstances. 62 comments have come in requesting an elimination of the requirement for policy precursor adoption prior to future residential neighborhood development. And many of these indicated that these should be either just a consideration or that they be eliminated altogether. 14 comments came in supporting development of future residential neighborhood or specifically development on District Lot 509, 510. 6 requested that the future residential neighborhood lands be included in the growth management boundary. 2 requested consideration of servicing for development over 200 meters of elevation. 2 requested consideration for an increased range of housing types or to support single family development. And then there were comments to not permit development of future residential neighborhood lands, both for 34,000 population threshold had been reached, and another comment along the same lines, but suggesting a population threshold of 50,000. Okay, so bringing you up to speed on that, we're going to move forward. We had talked about policy topic 1, the definition of substantial completion, and in the last meeting, Council supported the definition as it was currently outlined in the OCP. Policy number 2, the topic area that we discussed last time, was to remove the word small when contemplating limited development that may be considered in portions of future residential neighborhood under defined conditions, and this was specific regarding extraordinary benefit situations. So Council provided us with direction that removing small was appropriate there. The third topic, which was the concept of a 22,500 threshold for population that had to be surpassed prior to future residential neighborhood development being considered in an extraordinary benefits development application situation. That one was tabled, and we would like to pick up at that point and see if we can get clarity from Council as to whether or not we want to continue with this 22,500 threshold in the OCP policy. One thing I do want to point out, in the presentation that I gave last week, I had truncated the language for these policies to try and make it a bit more clear, but I think I want to make sure there was no confusion around what we're talking about, so I have instead included the entire policy and highlighted the section that we're talking about. So this is the policy that references consideration of development on future residential neighborhoods if the policy precursors are adopted and there's extraordinary benefits and the population threshold of 22,500 has been surpassed. So does Council have direction for staff on whether or not we want to maintain that population threshold of 22,500?
And just before we did set direction, take the small portion,
Small portion is being removed, yeah.
So, go ahead, sir.
Number 2, Council has adopted policies that address all items identified. I thought perhaps an individual property owner may be able to address some of those themselves without having to wait for us.
Through you, Mayor Heisman. That we will have an opportunity to discuss that element of this policy in 1 minute. That's the policy precursors, and that's one of the items that we can get to. And perhaps I didn't have them in the best order, but
That's okay.
at this point, I just would like to focus on the 22,500 threshold.
Okay. On the 22,500 number in there.
In our engagement, did we ever tell the community we would be eliminating this number? Because it's currently in the OCP.
Not all of the growth area, just on certain lots.
It's in there. I'm just wondering if we ever told the community if we engaged them on the idea of taking it off.
No, since the discussion draft came out and then this draft came out, we have not gone out and done any specific engagement on taking the existing policies and then removing elements that are in the proposed draft. Really, this is more of a response to some of the stuff that's coming since that draft.
But this was part of the options we gave to people. for growth management.
Yeah, when we did give growth management policies to the community to provide input on, there were 3 options, and one of them did involve the 22,500. But we didn't provide, there's never been specific engagement on, do you want this one removed?
Councillor Race, and before Councillor Race goes, this is a committee meeting, so I just wanted to make sure anyone in the audience who wants to ask a question or make a comment, please just put your hand up and you'll come to the table and do so. Try to confine your topic, your conversation, your questions to real focus, so we can make sure we're being expeditious and useful with our time. But if you do have a comment or question, just come on up and I'll put you in order. Councillor Race.
Thank you. So, a couple of things. So, one is updating our current population to get to the point where we think we might be at the 22,500 threshold. I understand would be based on annual figures published by the province. Do we have any update from the province since the census? Have we got anything to give us an idea of what rate we're actually growing at right now?
Yeah, Mayor, through you, the provincial population estimates come out in July of each year. And we looked at this after a policy discussion with council a few months ago, and I just wanted to clarify for council and the community. So in between census years, sorry, just one moment. So BC Stats sub-provincial estimates that are produced annually on July 1st reflect, are sort of aligned with provincial level totals, and they're recognized as the official population estimates. And so they are calibrated, but we won't know until this next July. So
do we know what 2017 July was?
I don't have that on the
Yeah,
top
we
of
don't
my
have
head,
that.
but we might be able to find it easily.
We can come back to council with that amount. Would you like me to go?
Yeah, I guess, so the way I went away from the last meeting was thinking that the number, if we put the policy precursors in, the number, and the estimate given by staff was it might take 3 years for those precursors, that the number became almost academic because it seemed the population was increasing to the point where in 3 years we'd be very close, if not at that number anyway. And it's hard to look at that without the policy precursors because the two of them go together. The first time I looked at those policy precursors, which is several weeks ago now, I kind of scanned it and I kind of came away with the impression that, well, we're sort of partway through some of them. Maybe it's not that long, maybe it's a year before we get that done, and so they're not a big deal. But now if it's 3 years, it's a bigger deal. It becomes, I think, almost the thing that governs more than the population, how quickly we would get those done. So I take the point that if we've gone to the community with 22.5, then I don't want to go back and reset the clock and go to the community with something different at this point. I think that's an important consideration, and I don't want to backtrack from that. What I am worried about is the policy precursors, which I tend to agree with as a matter of policy, having the policy in place, somehow stretch that to a longer time. And so I was trying to think about how to deal with this, and I'd be inclined to say, 22.5 or 3 years, whichever comes first. And the policy precursors better be there. And if they're not, then we're the ones that are kind of short. But it doesn't, then we're not subject to future budget decisions and stuff like that. Try to be fair to the landowning community and get this policy done. We're going to have a discussion on where affordable housing is, that's one of them, but try to put some limit on that so that doesn't kind of stretch out into a 4 or 5 or longer process and stretch this out. So I can live with 22.5 just because I think it's going to become a bit of a, at the rate we're going, a bit of a non-issue. If we get the policy in place, population increases, it'll be a couple of years anyway before a landowner can really bring one of these things in, and I think that's probably the intent of where we want to go.
So I have Louise, I just, in terms of process, Council, try to keep to questions or clarification, and I don't want to get too ahead of decisions if there's more questions to be answered, so or opinions necessarily. So let's try to focus in on questions and clarification, and then we'll get more into the opinion side of things once we make sure all the questions are answered. Do you want to go now, Louise, or do you want to wait a bit?
Yeah, I can jump in. I'm from the Chamber of Commerce. We will be reviewing this. We haven't had the opportunity yet with our schedules, which was this in December, January, but staff have reassured me that there is plenty of time to put in an official feedback. We did give feedback back in July, August around this issue where we supported eliminating the 22,000 threshold population cap threshold. Not because we want to impact or hinder growth management, but because we feel that as long as there's a strict set of criteria, it can ensure that we have sustainable development that allows for employment land, wildlife, diversity of housing. So yeah, so we support getting rid of it with a strict set of criteria. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen,
I'll wait. I don't have a question. I was gonna.
Jason.
So I just wanted to go to, I know in the staff memo, talks about the high-level summary of major elements of growth management policies. And so it says, time recognizes and supports the following land uses outside growth management boundary. Resource lands, significant employment generating activities, and that's the one actually I really wanted to highlight is some significant employment generating activities, because I think that, you know, at some of the comments and feedback that I've heard is that, you know, somehow that this policy is, you know, preventing a fantastic employment generating project, when I think that we already have measures in place. If somebody came to us with a really big employment generating use as opposed to a residential subdivision in this area, that we could go ahead and move forward with that, notwithstanding any of this stuff. This is more focused on growth of residential neighborhoods. Am I correct in my assumption?
Yes, that is the intention of the policy and the way it is drafted, to provide that flexibility for employment generating activities and to have the growth management boundary pertain to residential development.
Karen,
Through the chair to Councillor Race. I do have a question. I'm trying to follow your train of thought. In putting a time limit on the policy precursors, I sort of see that as a way of possibly hindering future council's discretion to put their budget money in their policy direction where they see fit based on. So I'm a little, so fettering their discretion a little bit to put that in the OCP, you almost lock it in, and I'm not sure that's. So I just wanted to know if Councillor Race wanted to speak to that. So I'm trying to follow your train of thought.
Well, fair enough.
With all due respect.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And so, I mean, I look at this as the OCP is a community vision, and try to provide a vision for the community and for potential investors, landowners, etc. But the reality is, it could be changed next week by a resolution of council. So it's never cast in stone. And if some opportunity came along or some desirable thing came along, any future council is not fettered by it. They are free to make a decision to amend the OCP. And so I don't, with respect, take it quite as fettering future councils, more trying to provide guidance for future councils and the community at large.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm still fettered by the geophysical aspects of this policy, that when we have land that is already growth bound, like has very clear division and lines, and we basically, in order to increase density down here, we're going to be reliant on people taking down other people's houses in order to build density and growth within the areas that you've actually set forward as a growth area boundary. So instead of actually having new land to build housing on and do an appropriate neighborhood design, which we can work with the proponent of, we can include employment, it is up to our discretion right now as to what gets built anywhere because of policy. So we have policy in place, and I don't disagree with working on policy that makes growth sustainable, but to actually put artificial population caps, and then say all density is reliant on you giving up your home, doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm struggling with not moving up to benchlands that actually have way less geohazards in them and are on benches and are previous industrial lands, as opposed to saying, okay, 30 people have to give up their homes in downtown Squamish in order for us to densify and build on. Or businesses have to give up and be knocked down. Or we're going to build over, and there's a lot of land that can be built on down here. We have the oceanfront and waterfront landing. But to put caps on land that we have, I'm sorry. Thank you, Patty. Yes, thresholds. To put thresholds on lands seems rather artificial to me, because we can ask for employment lands up there. We can work with the communities to actually build those lands. And it is very much those lands, because when I think about down here, I think, man, we're going to rezone green space to add housing, and we're going to look at debris flow barriers where we have land that is constrained by, already has boundaries, is privately owned, is empty, is at infrastructure, is not beyond infrastructure, and is something that the mountain bike community holds in extremely high value and can be worked on with the proponent. So having policy around caps or anything else is difficult for me to grasp.
So I just want to make sure everyone's talking about the same things. So we're not just talking about one landowner. There's obviously a couple of big landowners. But we're talking about a policy and not about a specific development. So it's from the policy point of view, this is not a conversation, this is not a rezoning, this is not a sub-area plan conversation. This is a how do we want to have the OCP inform future decisions on how things may be. This is not a rezoning. I just want to make sure that's clear.
Can I follow up?
Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, taking those comments into account, I appreciate that. But when you look at that whole upper area that is owned by basically 2 or 3 people, you see growth going on in some areas and growth better in the other areas, and they're basically at the same elevation. So the perception of that to the community and to myself just seems rather unequal. So I just, if you're going to have growth, protecting growth within a certain region, you have to have land to build on, otherwise, which we don't. So that is my concern, is that you're relying on people in the downtown or in Brackendale to sell their houses and move out of the community. I don't know where they move to if they're selling for density. Like, for instance, 3rd Avenue or all the other places in downtown.
And I'm wondering if we put a finer point on it. What's currently in council's agreed to this, I understand, is that we have a 34,000 threshold. And we've created criteria to consider things before that threshold is met in these extenuating circumstances. Councillor Chappelle talked about a few of them. So that conversation's already had. Obviously, it's still part of the big public process, and we're looking for feedback through the OCP on that in and of itself. There's another layer of a threshold that's in the OCP draft currently at this 22,500, and that's the piece we're talking about now. That is, has obviously some intention behind it, and I think, but I think we need to focus it in on that piece of the conversation at this point. I just want to make sure that that's what we're talking about. Gary, did you want to speak or address something in response to something?
Sorry,
and I've got Jason, Pete, and Ted.
Just a correction. To get to 34,000 comes almost, I would say the vast majority of those units don't require people to knock houses down. It's waterfront, it's oceanfront, it's Scott Crescent, it's, what's the other one up in just below the Highlands?
Thunderbird.
Thunderbird. The vast majority of those don't require houses to come down. We have lots of infill land that don't require houses to come down.
6,600 houses. Not
Which is that. I'm sure what that meant, but go ahead.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Heinzman, the 34,000 population is the low end of our infill capacity. When we did an analysis, we started out by looking at what are blank lands that are unoccupied lands that we have development applications for or zoning already for some of these very large developments. The 34 is the low end, doesn't even include the Chikai fan development. The number when we did our analysis goes quite a bit higher when we start thinking about what's going to be knocked down and built on top of over time. But the 34 is quite achievable without significant displacement.
Thank you. I have Jason, Pete, and Ted.
That was going to be mostly my question, was to say, because I thought that the majority, like talking like 85, 90% of the growth that's happening is on brownfield sites, so it's not existing residential. And I venture a guess that if you're a homeowner, I mean, it's definitely different for renters, and we are trying really hard to create a bunch of new rental housing, but if you're a homeowner, you have ultimate choice whether you sell your house or not. You can choose, and you know, maybe you might want to have a bit of a windfall to be able to move to a different type of housing or something like that. So I feel like, yeah, that was going to be my question. So thanks for answering.
Peter.
And my question sort of relates to Sue's talking about moving up on the bench land. Is it your intent to work through these policies one by one, pick them off one by one? Because if you're going to get down to number 7, which was the talk about development of 200 meters and above with infrastructure all week.
We're going to get all that stuff.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
All of that.
Ted.
Just a couple things. Just to understand what Sue was saying, through the chair. So you don't agree with the growth boundary that we have now?
It's the cap.
Yeah.
I was just about to say cap again.
And
but
then,
That's what we have
I'm
now.
gonna ask Matt to maybe
Threshold.
explain the difference between a cap and a threshold,
And
because,
cap is just stuck in my mind.
Okay.
because
Yeah, I know.
So, you don't like that boundary, Sid? So that's
I
what
like the
you're
boundary
saying?
around the top, I just don't like thresholds.
Okay, well,
both
that's-
thresholds. Anyway, maybe explain the difference between a cap and a
Sure.
threshold.
I think Sarah would
And
like.
what from a policy point of view, what the difference may mean in terms of the intention.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at answering this one. By development cap, I think what's commonly thought of is a sort of a finite number or development capacity, a cap, beyond which no more growth would be permitted. There are some communities that do limit their growth, and so in turn, we want to make sure that we're differentiating between a cap beyond which no further growth is actually permitted, and a threshold, which is a threshold that's reached. In this case, we're proposing to continue to use population threshold, which is a point in time beyond which you know put in place, or beyond which a certain action will be undertaken. In this case, there's a bunch of policy.
You know, that part I understood, I just didn't know.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah, thanks. But anyway, I guess it's a question on what I find most interesting, and I heard someone say it here, that any council can change this anytime they want. And if somebody comes up with a lot of jobs, we could change them. So that's good to know. But what holds it up is the points, the policy, adopt the policy items. It's us adopting the policy items. If we leave that as nothing can happen until those policies are adopted, we're holding it up. You know what I mean? So that one is kind of a sticking point. And also the one that I really like is the community amenity. So if something comes up on a piece of land that we all really like, or the next council likes, or everybody likes, then we can address it. So those are the two things I think that are the most important to me. I guess it's not a question, but.
It helps fine tune the conversation. I just don't want us to get into I have Karen and Jason.
I'm still supportive of the way this policy reads. I think it gives us both time to address the policy precursors, and as well, it extends it so that it's fair across all the large landowners. And I think it also gives us time to focus on existing neighborhoods where we haven't done any planning yet. And My worry over time, if we don't manage growth, is that we will actually build have and have not neighborhoods. And I think that it is important to limit growth so that we are looking at some of our existing high-density neighborhoods and then the neighborhoods that we know will get more dense over time, and make sure that they actually have the amenities so that we're not creating new neighborhoods before we bring the existing ones up to a standard that we think are livable and support healthy community and connect people to community. And so, to me, not managing our growth carefully is a distraction from the real work that still exists in our existing neighborhood. And that's my concern, why I've kind of held quite strongly to holding both the population cap and the policy precursors. Threshold, darn it! Sorry!
You do.
Why I've been an advocate for holding both the threshold and the policy precursors, because I think there's a lot of work to be done just to make Squamish more livable where we already have homes before we build new ones. So that's kind of where I'm sitting right now, and I also wonder if we can talk about the other pieces of this and come back to this one maybe, because the other pieces do provide context for this.
That was my thought too, and that's one of the reasons why I tabled it to begin with, is so we could fine tune some of these other things. I do have a list in front of me of Jason, Doug, and Ted. So why don't we do those three, move on to maybe some of the other policy pieces and come back to some of the final stuff.
I'm exactly where Councillor Elliott is. I think that's very, very well articulated, and that's the reasons why I support the policies as developed. And I just wanted to clarify for Councillor Pryor that, as we said earlier, if it's just an employment generating use, like if they wanted to do a rec tech hub and come in with an application tomorrow that is outside the growth management boundary, we could accept that under this OCP. We don't have to take care of any of the precursors or any of that. That is only for village and neighborhoods. And so I think that's an important distinction, you know, and that is an option that's there. And the implications for the district in terms of revenue and expenditure are very significantly different in the two scenarios. So that's why I'm supportive of the precursors, because we need to take care of that.
Thanks, Doug, and then Ted on that.
Yeah, I'll be brief. And it was just through the chair to a comment that Councillor Chappelle made about the areas outside the growth management boundary. I think just when I'm trying to visualize it in my mind, I think they're all greenfields with respect. And the only part of one that I can think of that might not be is the gravel pit on the way up to Garibaldi. Might not be considered greenfield. But I think beyond that, we're making decisions about greenfields as opposed to brownfields, previously developed sites, et cetera. And I recognize on some parts of it there's been some logging, but I think that's about the extent of it. And so I think by almost any definition we would consider it to be greenfield. The other thing is there are several landowners, not just two, because the Squamish Nation and through some of their subsidiary companies and so forth, I think have some significant parcels also outside of our growth management area. So this, to me, is more, by a long shot, more than just one or perhaps two parcels, and more than just the bench. I can think of, you know, other areas in the Chikai Fan and so forth that might one day be thought of. And so, so this is quite, me, this is broader than that.
I have Ted and Susan, and then I think what we'll do is we're just going to table this. We're going to move on to the other, the 200 meter.
So the precursors are only to do with residential development?
Well, we're going to get to those.
Okay. Well, Jason just said that anything else. So, okay, the second thing is, and you know, we want to control our growth. And I mean, I've listened to program after program on housing and affordability and growth. And if a lot comes up for sale today in Squamish, if you don't know the guy, you don't even have a chance to buy that lot because it's sold. We do not have enough lots. And so when we talk about controlling our growth, a modest little house in neighborhoods that were very, you know, in some of the less value neighborhoods are $800,000 and $900,000, and I don't know why it's so. When we're, you know, controlling growth, we're stamming it. And so I'm nervous when we start holding back on things. And yes, there is a lot of development in the downtown that may or may not go. There's lots of people that got their zoning done and they're sitting on their lot zoned for 100 units, but they're not building them. So it just doesn't help putting the brakes on things when we have no places for people to go. All it does is up the prices.
I have Susan focusing on 22,500, but we're gonna table that after this.
So limit, the policy 3, limit future residential neighborhood parcels. So these are looking at future residential.
Policy precursors?
Yeah, 20,
Okay, well, we're gonna go into that.
22,500, that's the 22,500 policy, I'm looking at it here. Considered until the district population has reached 22,500, which may seem like a threshold, but actually seems like a cap in that policy. And I would agree with Ted that, you know, in planning language, all the buzzwords are there. You're using a lot of fantastic language, but it doesn't pertain to a 12-kilometer community. These growth patterns contain limit sprawl in communities that are stretched and have the ability to sprawl into everywhere and don't have transportation and don't have those density problems. We're talking about little parcels of land in the big picture of things. We're talking about actually very small parcels of land that we're restricting development on that could be employment land with appropriate zoning, that could be used for whatever we actually foresee in the OCP. They don't have to be future residential lands. That's only what we're putting into the OCP. If we wanted employment, if we wanted to do other things with the land, that is all possible. Having artificial, this reads like a cap, even though you say it's a threshold, and I doubt any council, when this is in, would actually see it as a threshold, not a cap, and it means that it could be brought forward as either a threshold or a cap. And clearly our language is all over the place. I'm sure the public is just as confused. So having, you know, forcing people to imagine lands that are going to take just as long to build housing on as the fact that that land anywhere up there, whoever it's owned by, whether it's First Nations or the 509, 510, no, like, doesn't matter where it is, will take years to get neighborhood planning done, infrastructure planning done. It's going to take a long time, and we are in a housing crunch, and we don't have any housing. So Ted just said 900,000. An old 1920s house on 3rd just sold for 1.3 million. So if you think we're at 900,000, we've well surpassed that for a 50 by 100 foot lot because of the speculation, because of capping density and having growth boundaries. It's a free-for-all because everybody will want to densify in those areas, which is great for containment, but really poor public policy for maintaining affordability, for future growth, for like having the option to have employment lands. It's all residential. So I'm deeply
and that's your opinion. Let's move on to the other pieces, and we'll come back and we'll get more into arguing or debating this that piece. So let's move on.
Okay. The topic 4 of 7 that we wanted to ask about was one that we did discuss at the last meeting, and this is the policy precursors item. So the simplified language right here, and I do have a slide with the actual language, but the simplified language is limited development in future residential neighborhood parcels would not be considered until council has adopted all identified policy precursors. And the precursors are brand asset inventory, community amenity contribution policy, affordable housing strategy, missing middle housing policy and associated zoning regs, community wildfire protection plan, and a steep slope development permit area.
So any questions about any of these specifically? I have Susan and Ted.
Yeah, more of the, this is very specific, and I agree with all of this. I think this is actually moving forward policy that is badly needed. So I have no questions. I think it's an excellent initiative.
So I just want to fine tune the conversation. Perhaps I'll ask if you disagree with these are policy precursors that should be in place prior to prior to even, to considering growth outside the growth management area. Then?
I question why a person that had land with steep slope wouldn't be able to write their own steep slope development permit area. I question why a community wildfire protection plan, if a person had an individual acreage, why they couldn't do the wildfire protection plan on their property. Missing middle housing, well, that's different. Community amenity contribution, I mean, for sure by 22.5 we'll have that done. And the recreational value trails assessment, if someone has a piece of land and they had recreation, why could that not be done by that developable piece of land? Why does it have to be wait until we meet everybody everywhere in the whole municipality and make sure that the trail down at the ocean front hooks into something over here when that's not related? That's all. I just think that these things can move forward. They don't have to wait for us. There might be, out of all of those, I don't see anything that it couldn't be done by an individual prior to us adopting something.
Yeah,
Can staff speak to that?
I'm going to speak to it. I've got Susan and Doug, and then maybe staff can comment on all the comments. I think perhaps everything except the brand asset inventory could be a responsibility. I think we want to set criteria about how we define or articulate what brand asset inventory means, but I think the landowner can do that. I think we have to set up some criteria, so I don't actually necessarily inventory for the entire district needs to be done before this. All the other ones I think are really important pieces, really important policy pieces that need to be in place. This council knows probably more than most about how policies weren't in place when we had an influx of development, and we've been playing catch up on getting our policies up to today's standards for the last 3 years. And I wish we had had these policies 4 years ago, so when we had this influx, we were ready for it. So from my point of view, I think this is actually, in a weird way, the most fundamental piece to this. But I do, the only one I sort of question a little bit is the brand asset inventory. And I think maybe we just have to redefine how we meet our objectives there. But that's sort of the only one I'm questioning. I got Susan, and then if staff want to just respond to everything.
Yeah, the brand asset inventory, when I actually read that, I was like, I don't know what that means, because my brand is different than, you know, I think that saying brand in any municipal policy is quite subjective. So it may be economic land that we have to do an inventory on again shortly. But I would take out the first one, the rest of them.
Yeah, thanks. So, and I generally agree with all these, but I do have questions. As I said earlier, I mean, when I look at this, I think that most of it, I have difficulty seeing where it could take over 3 years, possibly, which is the comment that came out of the last meeting. And so the brand asset inventory, recreational and connectivity value of all trails and assets. Well, all assets is a very big term. If it's the trail network, I've got a book at my coffee table that goes into huge detail about that. So I think a significant amount of the work in some of these has already been done. CAC policy in progress, and I think overdue in progress. I would expect that soon. Affordable housing strategy, I know that's the next item on the agenda, but we had a committee produced a report that I thought was pretty good, and so I'm not sure where we go beyond that. Missing middle housing policy and associated zoning regulations. I missed the meeting, so I still don't understand completely what that is, but in any event, I wouldn't expect that's an entire zoning bylaw rewrite. Wildfire protection plan and steep slope development permit area, I imagine there's some templates out there that would be pretty helpful, so we're not inventing the wheel. So I look at that and I think, well, that, gosh, you know, in a good year we could get almost all of that done. We just kind of put our minds to doing it. So, Linda smiling, I know. Not happy with my comment, but nevertheless, I agree with these things, but I think, you know, if you're clear about the parameters of them, then I don't think they have to turn into kind of a never-ending project. And some of them, as I say, I hope are almost at completion in any event. So those should be I would hope would be relatively easy things to get, but I certainly agree with the idea of having the policy in place before we consider going into some of these greenfield areas. I no debate about that.
I'll just go to Igor quickly and then maybe I'll staff can respond to that.
I have a question
Well,
regarding...
maybe just introduce
Oh,
yourself.
sorry,
just in
Igor
case.
Zalubniak. I've been in and out of the valley since 1974, so I kind of follow things along. I have a question about the language, very specifically, limited development. If you're going to have precursors and issues that deal with development, why do you need the word limited? It's either development or it's not. It can be limited in area, scope, location, features, but it's just development. This has got two meanings in my mind when I read it. One is we need these precursors, and two, once we've got those, we're going to limit your development. So I'm not sure which is the message that's being received by the public on that policy.
And that's a good question, because I think this is one of those things, let's get to the intention of the language and see if it's the right language that fits the intention. So, Sarah, Matt, I don't know who wants to.
Okay, I'm just going to start by flipping over to the actual policy language, because I want to make sure we don't have any misinterpretation based on my attempt to, simplify the policy. So this is the actual policy that is we're discussing, and it's the black piece at the very bottom. Council has adopted policies that address all items identified in section 9.2H, and 9.2H has a detailed list of the precursor policies, which I can flip to in a second when I start talking about the policies. And to respond to that question, I think, in a way, I think the comment, if I understood it, was reflecting the two things that this is trying to do. One, the policy is intending to allow only a portion of the parcel to be developed.
Parcels, like there's more than one.
Yes, whatever parcel is under consideration. But of all the future residential neighborhood parcels, the intention was to say, we don't want to open up development of the entire area. The idea is that some part of that parcel could be considered for development if there was an extraordinary benefit to the community. So one is talking about a limited portion. We had earlier language around a small portion. That is going to be changed. We're going to remove the small portion, but the idea is still that it's not the entire parcel up for development. And then the precursors are considered to be important policies that we want to have in place prior to development going on. So I now want to talk about those precursors because I think some of the questions...
You just go back to that one.
Yes.
My read on how this was reading, and we're talking about large areas of land, hundreds and hundreds of acres, cumulatively. Some are very large parcels of 400 acres, some are 200 acres. So from my point of view, as I read this, the intention, I think you said it there, is that we don't envision just blanket open everything outside the boundary up, but we'll consider portions of it. And I think where the word limited comes in, that's where people read into it differently. And I think you said it, the intention is that portions. Is there a way to add that language in? To clarify what the intention is?
Yeah, I can certainly look. Maybe we won't wordsmith it here.
Yeah, no, but I just,
yeah,
that's what I heard from what you said.
I can certainly do that. And I can, in a way, if you look at it, we can remove the word limited and say, consider residential development in portions of future residential neighborhood parcels, and maybe we achieve that goal.
Yeah. And I don't know, it may need there to be qualifying sentence to say something like, considering these are very large tracts of land, it's envisioned only portions, or whatever. But I think just getting back more to the intention of what you're trying to do, and a lot of meaning can come out of one word and be interpreted differently. Sorry, go on, Matt, you were going to move on to...
Yes. So this is the policy that the last one we looked at references that outlines the precursors. What we were looking at before was our summary, but this is the actual language in the OCP talking about the precursor policies that need to be completed. The first one, brand asset inventory, seems to have garnered the most attention in terms of whether or not it's suitable. I'll just tell you what the intention of that was, but we're certainly open to changing that if council wishes. I think this one came about, I believe, in a meeting when there was a question around what would be considered an extraordinary benefit. If someone is coming to us and saying, there's an extraordinary benefit available through development on my land because there is this asset on our land and it would be of value to the community. I think the thought in developing that policy was that for council to be able to say, yes, indeed, we know that this is a really important asset, that we would need to be able to look at that asset in comparison to all of the other assets in the community. So, for example, if it was a rock climbing area, we would need some way of saying, yes, this is a fantastic rock climbing area compared to the Smoke Bluffs or the Chief. Or perhaps we would look at it and be able to say, actually, in our inventory, we've ranked its importance, and in a comparison, it actually isn't a super important asset in comparison, and thus it may not trigger the extraordinary benefits clause. So the intention is to try and give council information for assessing what is an extraordinary benefit or what is an important asset that needs protection.
So on that first one, Susan and Ted.
What's an extraordinary, I don't think municipalities should be measuring extraordinary benefit in that way. Saying, you know, like for instance, that you gave, saying that there's a climbing area over here that's not as beneficial as a climbing area over there. That climbing area may be a great climbing area for kids and other people that, you know, that maybe some other people don't find a value. So I think you can't be subjective with what is a recreational benefit. And so having an inventory of all our recreational benefits is, I think, an almost impossible task to complete, and it takes far too much resourcing. So like actually inventorying all that, assigning value is going to be, first of all, it pits our communities against each other, and I don't find value in that.
But maybe I'll ask a question. According to what's written currently in the OCP, in order to be able to come in before the 34,000 threshold, 34, we're saying extraordinary community benefit. And I think that's not extraordinary community benefit. So
you present what could be, do anything.
No, I'm just trying to, let me fine tune it before you interrupt. What Matt said was this was trying to help define what that might look like. And I think this probably comes directly out of Mr. Chima's lands and the mountain biking community's articulation on that. So trying to define what extraordinary community benefit might be. If we create that language in there without any sort of parameters around it or any idea of what that could be, I think it opens it up to just being any other development and not necessarily moving outside of a growth management boundary. So with that context, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that extraordinary community benefit it's so subjective that it would have to go to public process, and it would have to be an extensive public process. And I would rather define the process that we come up with than go through an entire inventory process of creating, but like having some defined IAP2 consultation where an extraordinary community benefit, you know, like you could say a hospital or a mountain bike trail. I think there's a ton of benefits that you could define, but you know, how do you actually assign a measurable and accurate measurability to those benefits without running down a rabbit hole of trying to get everybody's community benefit? And I think there has to be a clear, defined community process, not defined by politics.
So that brings an interesting question. Maybe, Matt, you could walk us through, hypothetically, very hypothetically, how a land developer that's currently outside the growth management boundary may come to initiate the process of doing this. Now, maybe walk that through, because it's not the process of actually approving the development. That comes later, and this would be a process before that happening, to simply allow them to move into the process of doing their, so
I can
would you help me
speak to
with that?
Yeah, so one of the things that also came up in the discussion around the extraordinary benefits with council earlier on was that we did want some way to test if an extraordinary benefit did indeed exist when an application came forward. So there's a policy in the OCP, and maybe the easiest thing for me to do is to read it out. But the first piece to it would be what are the criteria for an extraordinary benefit, and then we have essentially a council community test for that benefit. And so topic 5, which we'll get to, is what's the definition of the extraordinary benefit. There's 3 points. Maybe I won't go to that, I'll go to the process. And the process, I'm going to read this out for you. Present proposed extraordinary benefits for development in future residential neighborhoods to council and the community for an initial preliminary consideration in determining the adequacy of the proposed benefit prior to the development application receiving full council consideration. It's not extensively outlined, but the intention is that when an application comes forward with a proposed extraordinary benefit, just that piece of the application comes to council for consideration, and there's a community component, which I think at that point council and staff would be able to determine how in-depth that would go. It'd probably have something to do with the magnitude of the development and the sensitivity of the development, but I would imagine there would be some kind of public outreach and comment period, maybe online or maybe in person, maybe a meeting to try and get input on that. And council would then provide direction to staff, we consider this extraordinary or not, and then that would inform the development application process, which would then begin in earnest.
Yeah, and there's pros and cons to that process. Susan, are you good?
Thanks. Well, exactly. I mean, that's fine. I think the way you have that precursor, you make it sound a lot more difficult than that. Because I was going to say, how do we determine whether there's a community amenity? The landowner says, our land has got a community amenity, this is what it is. You go, oh, okay, we'll take that to council and see what they think. Surface. That's all it is.
And that's in the OCP.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine, but that's what that precursor said. That's just what Matt just told us, right? That's what that precursor.
No, that's the process.
Well, that's the process, which is fine, but we don't have to adopt anything.
Yeah. So can I respond to that?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. In a way, these are kind of layered things that could support each other, but certainly staff is not tied to this. Like if I get the sense that council doesn't want that brand asset inventory, happy to remove it. That can be addressed as a process when there's an application that comes forward, the community could be engaged and get it. Is this extraordinary, or council could make a decision. That can be done later. This was trying to bring forward some information to this point, but certainly happy to go with what council's interests are.
That's good. I mean, I understand that now, and so you just wanted us to write the words saying that in paper, but we don't have to say that, right? The precursor was get together and write those, what you just said.
No, the precursor would be like doing a ranking of this trail is a fantastic trail, this trail not so fantastic. So that would be an input of information.
But the individual landowner can do that because they can come to you prior to that and go, oh, you've missed this land, and on this land we have this, and then you can go, yeah, you're right, we'll take that to council.
That would be, if we didn't want to go through a massive inventory, that could work as well. We could use that process.
Doug?
Thanks. I think for me, we're talking about two different things. So the brand asset inventory, for me, would identify recreational and connectivity value of trails, etc. And for me, the reason for that, or the principal reason for that, is because those are things that we would want to preserve in any development of the property. So with any development, almost inside or outside of the growth management boundary, I think that would be a necessary step. And whether it happens before the application comes in or whether we do it in the course of the application, I think that's a critical thing, because the result is we don't want to see property developed and find we've lost some of these things. And so whether or not that discloses something that is an extraordinary community benefit or not, maybe it will, but I think the developer would be in developer's best interest to point out things that might be an extraordinary community benefit. So I look at that as being something that we would want to have an idea of these lands outside before we sort of got too far into a development process. So when you're talking about all this land that's outside the growth management boundary, That's a big area. And to start inventorying all of this, going beyond what's presently published, for example, the $20 booklet that I talked about, maybe we go a little bit beyond it, but I mean, you could spend a lot of time out there before you got to any conclusion. So I can understand doing that, but once again, I think you kind of have to draw a circle around it and say, okay, this is what we want to know before we see a development application as just a starting point. In the course of the application, as you get, if you go through rezoning and you get right down into the nitty-gritty of it, you might identify some other things that have to be preserved. But where do we want to start with in this thing? But it's not the thing that determines whether it's an extraordinary community benefit or not. That's kind of a separate mindset, if you like, because every development will have trails. I mean, that's just a given these days. These large developments, they're all going to have that kind of stuff. There's just no other way around it. And other things. Some will have rock outcroppings, etc. But I think they're all going to have that, and it's just where do we want to be when the process starts? What kind of framework do we want to have in front of us before the process starts, so we can make informed decisions going through the process?
Erin, and then we're going to try to find some consensus on this.
So I still think this one's important. My understanding of the brand inventory is it's not just about biking. Our brand promise through the branding project was that you can get to all of our world-class activities within 10 minutes of each other. And that's what we're trying to protect. I've also spoken with rec tech company people here, and one of the reasons some of them moved here was because of our brand. Because in the same way that Santa Cruz has bikes and skateboards and surfboards, because there's a certain essence to Santa Cruz that people get, and that's why they buy those brands. I think for rec tech in Squamish, there's that same idea that there's something that makes Squamish Squamish. And so the brand inventory asset plan is there so that we look at all of our assets, from kiteboarding and paddleboarding to rock climbing to running trails to biking, and that we can identify the high value ones. So there may come a day where something like Half Nelson, someone might want to develop on something like a Half Nelson, which is a world-class trail. And it's not okay to just build up to within 20 feet of that and have people biking through a suburb. That's not protecting our brand. You protected the trail, but you haven't protected our brand. Or if there's no way to save a trail like that, that we have to replace it with a like trail that would give people the same experience, that same sense of being in the middle of nowhere. And so our recreation community is saying, can we put these kinds of policies in place before there's the growth pressures, so we understand our really high value assets, how big we think our setbacks need to be from those high value assets, what keeps Squamish Squamish. And it's part of our growth management policy. I think if we lose our brand, we become any other community, small community out there. This is about keeping us special, and I don't think we should just leave it up to a developer by developer process, because then we can't see the cumulative effects over time. One of the things we've been grappling with just in the Howe Sound region is how do we understand the cumulative impacts of all the development, because it's all done piecemeal on the industrial side. So in the same way, by having this brand inventory up front, we can start to see the cumulative impacts, because development will happen not just on one piece of land, but it'll spread out over the valley. And so if we don't have this in place, we can lose control of what we're actually, I think, is really, really important to protect. And I think our community told us that very, very clearly through the engagement process, is please keep Squamish Squamish. Like, give it a small town feel, protect the things we love. And so I do think this one's fundamental to our philosophy about why many of us moved here.
Thanks, Susan.
Thanks. I appreciate everything that you said, except for the majority of our recreation infrastructure, we don't own. It's on private land, or it's in provincial parks. So they already have an asset management plan for the provincial parks. The chief, we already have protected the smoke bus. We've made it into municipal park. So people way before us have thought about the inventory of our brand, and we had this brand way before we had our brand. People are moving here because we were the recreation capital of Canada, and we have amazing assets, but the majority of them we've failed to protect because we're capping lands that are gonna be cut off from, like, that's what's gonna happen, is that private owners that aren't gonna be working with council are gonna cut off our recreation infrastructure. Because the majority of our trails are on private land, on industrial land, and we failed to protect them. We failed to have land management agreements with landowners. You know, we've left that to outside groups, and our access is going to be cut off. So inventorying provincial assets and outside assets, that's all outside our growth boundary now. Our only connectivity is our, what do we have, the one trail that runs like, the legacy, not the legacy trail.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. There's one trail that it isn't even an effective trail. People use it to get back and forth downtown, but it's also in unbuildable land. But our, our active transportation corridors, the ones that are actually 8 to 80 and not protecting our, and building housing that's 8 to 80 and actually having, focusing it on the 8 to 80 infrastructure as opposed to the spandex clad, all of the
You're way off
masses.
topic.
No, brand inventory is like, it's vague and we can't, and it's outside our district. So it doesn't make any sense to me to focus on
So
brand inventory.
just to be clear, the OCP is 100% inside our district. There are brand assets outside the district Squamish, but the OCP governs
That's
inside
right.
the district Squamish. I think what I'm hearing is that we all want to protect our brand, what makes us special, access to trails, backcountry, And we have different philosophies on how we go about doing that. But I think fundamentally we all want to protect that. That's inherent to who we are and how we want to make sure we're positioning the future. How we get there is what we're disagreeing on.
Yeah, relationship
whether,
building is better.
whether it's policies through the OCP or other ways of actually achieving preservation of these important assets. I just want to make sure, we actually agree, I think, I heard from both Councillor Chabelle and others, that we agree on the fact that brand is important. How we get there is maybe what we're disagreeing on. I have Ted, I want to go through these one by one and at least get things off the list that we agree on.
Well, I'll be real quick. I heard from our very wise planning department that this brand asset inventory, if someone has something that they feel fits that, can come to our planning, and planning can bring that to us without having to do a community-wide branding. They themselves can go, I think you're right, this is a good idea, we will take this forward to council. And if I heard that, I'm 100% right.
And then if council adopts it, it needs the precursor, correct?
Sorry, are you talking about in the example of an application coming forward?
Example.
I think what he's saying is the brand asset one, and this is council approves these policies. If a policy comes forward, it doesn't matter if we've generated or if a policy comes forward and council adopts that, or
No, if
brand
the
asset
development comes
analysis.
forward with,
It doesn't matter who's doing it. It could be the developer, it could be Sorca, it could be the Climbers Access Society. If we come forward and assets are approved by council, that meets the criteria under this precursor, correct?
Right, yeah, if a document came
We're
forward.
not saying how it
Yeah.
gets generated.
For sure, if any document came forward that met these, this doesn't stipulate who does it, it's
Exactly.
somebody else could do it.
And that clarified?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just
Council,
council of the
which
day.
is council of the day, exactly. So I want to start to pick these up because we're of course way behind schedule. Go ahead.
So we would let a developer do our brand asset management? Is that what you just said?
I just said that this policy doesn't say who needs to create the document.
It says who needs to approve the inventory, not who creates it.
That is a different conversation.
We approve it, but we just had a conversation in council the other day about professional reliance, and when there's things in conflict in terms of different values in the community, you wouldn't just outsource that to anybody. You would make sure you had full control over who was doing that evaluation. So I don't mind if someone wants to pay for it, but these policies, they're ours. We should be designing. So I think we have to be careful about that. Not anybody can do our wildfire protection plan. That's ours. Someone could pay us, and we would hire someone to do it. But I think we have to be careful about just making the distinction about
I-
who is
But
doing it.
we're not making the distinction, either way. None of these we're making, the distinction is council approves it. Council to say, well, can determine anything, but what the OCP says, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, is that council needs to approve these policies, how they're generated, who's involved in that, obviously gets evaluated by council of the day whether or not it meets our goals or not. Fair enough, Sarah?
Yeah, just from where I sit, I just wanted to make an observation. I mean, when looking at this suite of policy precursors, by and large, I think that most of them are considered to be kind of within the realm of local government purview and jurisdiction. A bunch of them are already underway. I'll come back to the brand asset inventory in a moment, but in terms of the wildfire protection planning and the steep slope development permit area, I mean, the local government is in charge of like land development and management and approvals. And so it follows that we would take a front seat and lead development of the development permit area, just as we've done with our development permit areas to date. Similarly with the community wildfire protection plan, that involves like a lot of intergovernmental and working with agencies, so we would likely take the front seat. I think by and large all of these are ones that we would take on. Certainly they can be accelerated with the support and the assistance of land developers and other community organizations, and I think all of the work would necessarily require and warrant public participation, engagement. We wouldn't go forward with any of those without that. So, and I think that the brand asset inventory, that when I think about that one, certainly in terms of identifying the assets of value, of community value, that would require engagement with the community, and we would want the council to endorse that as a policy precursor, having done that. So I don't know if that's helpful, but certainly when I look at those.
Okay, if we can go through all these and we'll come, go ahead.
I'm sorry, so does that mean, when you say that somebody can bring it forward, does that mean they have to do the entire inventory or just inventory their piece of land?
The way this is drafted, the intention of this draft, or this policy, is that it is a comparison of assets across the community. And so the way it's drafted, yes, it would be the entire community. It is not set up as a evaluation of the assets on one property under consideration.
So yeah, so that anybody that came forward would have to asset value the entire community, all the connections of the trails, bring it forward, get it adopted by the council, and then try and realize their piece of it. So that's exactly what I don't support. If you're just saying that somebody can come forward and say, here's the value that I bring to this asset management, is different than saying it.
I'm going to start at the bottom. Does anyone disagree with having a precursor of steep slope development permit area? Nobody does. Does anyone disagree with the precursor of community wildfire protection plan? Nobody does. Missing, besides not understanding what it is, we can get there. Missing middle and regulations policy precursors. Anyone? No.
Just a question.
Yeah.
I know the wildfire one everybody's working on, so I'm not worried about that one.
We directed staff to start working on missing middle.
Yeah, well, I just don't understand the missing middle housing policy one. I mean, that's where we're looking for types of housing that we're not building right now?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just in my mind trying to get the timeline on these.
Yep. With that one, the intention is to try and ensure that we don't just get single family, townhouse, and condos, that we get a diversity. So we have policy in the OCP, so the policy piece is now in the OCP, and we need to bring, but there's some regulations that are hopefully supporting that in the zoning bylaw. Yeah, so the zoning bylaw update will address the second part of that.
Affordable housing strategy, nope.
On that one again for planning, we're working on that one as well.
18.
Yeah. Community amenity contribution policy? Yeah.
On the last one,
Which
affordable
one?
housing strategy.
Go ahead.
Housing authority is not addressed in the OCP. It does not, or I can't find, I shouldn't say it isn't addressed, it's not, I can't find it anywhere in the OCP.
Council has not specifically made a determination at this point to set
On
up
OCP.
a housing authority. It's certainly part of what we've been talking about and the evolution of where we're going, but it's not currently funded.
That question may be before council in the next 2 months.
Exactly. So that whole affordable housing policy piece, we've got.
It's coming very quickly.
Yeah.
I would feel pretty comfortable with an OCP that actually addressed a way to manage our affordable housing. As opposed to
It would be great,
doing
but
the entire OCP.
I think there's a whole, I think the language in the OCP is directing us or trending us in that direction. And then the OCP doesn't solve every nut and get to the
That's a
detail.
monster nut.
All right, so nobody disagrees on the community amending contribution policy. Anyone disagree with that as a precursor?
Timeline,
February.
see, fine there.
Brand asset inventory, it seems to be the only rub. And I think, and just so we don't re-argue it again, I think everyone's seen its value in figuring out how we make sure we're keeping our brand assets. It's what's the effective way of getting there is, I think, the other conversation. And Kate, you want to add to that before we go to Councilor Race? Okay.
Yes. Councilor Race, you brought up some points that I did want to respond to about ensuring that we maintain connectivity in the trails. There are policies in the document that are designed to address those. And in fact, SORCA already sat down with us and some other trail user groups to go through and say, hey, here are the critical connections. And we now have a map that says critical connectors, both existing and future. We have a policy that's intended to set up a group that would do a review from the trail users. So I do think we actually have some good policy, new policy in the document that's going to help us protect our trail infrastructure through the development process, and this is not necessary for that. So I think the OCP has its strength in those areas outside of this one piece of policy, which means that this one should only be considered, I think, from the point of us, along what Karen was saying, Councillor Elliott was saying, in terms of understanding how to protect elements in our, understanding which are the most important ones to protect over time.
Did you have a further question, or was that your question?
Yeah, thank you for that. And so I tend to agree with Councillor Elliott about leaving that in there because the way this is kind of unfolding, and we had questions and discussion around process and how might this actually unfold. And it seems to me that with these, if there's going to be an application, there's kind of an initial door opening or not application. And the subjective thing is the extraordinary community benefit. That's the thing that says the door is open or it is not, the threshold applies and wait your turn. And in considering whether or not there's going to be an extraordinary community benefit, a lot of other things can be looked at, but we want the policy and the key things identified first because some of those would impact that decision. There'd be other stuff, but I think that's the thing that opens the door or not. And if there is no, and council determines there is no extraordinary community benefit on whatever their thinking is of the day, then there is no door open. Applications are not considered and it doesn't proceed further than that. So, and some of that other stuff that I talked about, would be as you get into the zoning. It sounds like a lot of that is not just a trail network, but there's other things. So there perhaps are other steps to get that inventory together. I take that point. But I think that's, to me, that's the subjective thing in all of this. It's not the discussion at the moment, I think it's the next or one after that, but in any event, so.
Ted?
Well, a couple things on that same subject. We do know, well, in my opinion, I know of some lands that have a community, an extraordinary benefit right now. And I've heard loud and clear from the recreational people in the community that they feel that there's a real community amenity in certain lands. And so if we don't have this policy done, then that land's unlucky. That land can't come in. They have to wait for us.
This is
Lands.
Lands, yeah.
I mean, every rezoning application or OCP amendment that's currently permissible under the OCP has to go through that public scrutiny,
Yes,
community
well,
amenities, all
that's
part
my
of
point, so.
this. This is above and beyond that we're talking about, and it's to open the door to the possibility of considering.
Yes.
So it can't be compared to things that's already within the growth management area.
I'm talking about everything that's outside.
Okay, good.
So I'm just saying that they have to wait until that one little policy that we do that, so we go through the whole community and we determine what all the assets are in the community. And so some guy that has some land down at the river that's outside our growth barrier, he goes, hey, I want to put a bridge across the river. And we go, well, sorry, you're on the outside. And actually, we didn't think about a bridge. So we don't have that in our policy. Whoops. No, I'm just saying that holding all this development until we have our policy in place, why don't we let the development come in, convince the planning department, hey, we have a benefit here, and have them come in, convince us, so we allow them to have a public open house and invite the community and show the community, and the community can have input, and then we get that question answered. Or we're gonna be waiting for, oh, we didn't budget for that this year, we'll have to put that off for next year. I just don't think that's fair, because we know there's a piece of land that has what some people feel is a community amenity, and we know that they wanna get forward. And we're going, no, I just don't think that's fair.
Jason?
I'm kind of look at it, I think we should keep that in, and I like the idea of, I think the way that Councillor Elliott has articulated it, in order for any kind of brand asset in North Tory to have integrity, I do think that is something that the district's going to have to take the lead on. I think it's something that it's in our economic interest to do, and because of that, I have no doubt that we would put forward, and a future council would put forward those resources in a short time frame to actually continue that work. Because I think it's sort of, you know, the rebranding of Squamish was the first stage of that, and now we're really needing to take a deeper dive because of the growth on, okay, what are the key assets, how are we going to protect them, and what are the opportunities, and, you know, maybe there is some other land that we might want to put another municipal park, like Smoke Bluffs Park, or maybe there's some other opportunities, and maybe we'll have further comment about the west side of Squamish River, for example, and you know what the community thinks about that. Yes, but I think that's the best way to do it, and I think that when it gets mixed up within a development process and a developer, then the integrity is called into question, rightly or wrongly. I mean, you know, developer could be doing their utmost to do it, but there will always be those that say, well, it's not an independent process. So I think let's have it be very independent, and let's keep that in there.
Okay, I think we've hammered this one to death. So I'll look for a motion. Councillor Elliott.
I move that, do you want me to do it separately? Is that better?
Why don't we do that one separately, we'll
Yeah.
do them all at once.
That the brand asset inventory remain as a policy precursor in the updated OCP.
In the version that goes to second reading.
Yep.
Seconded by Councillor Black-and-Wolf. I think we've discussed this enough, unless you have new information or a new argument. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Chappelle and Councillor Fire opposed. Motion carries. So perhaps we can get a motion for all the other ones. Moved by Councillor Reyes.
Yeah, I'll move the 2 to 6 inclusive of section H.
Remain in
Remain in the OCD draft.
for the second reading, seconded by Councillor Kent. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. What do we have to do now? 200, yes. 200 meter one, I think we still have to do.
Actually,
Oh, extraordinary community benefit.
we approved the
And policy
precursors,
six.
but the policy that requires the precursors is this one. That this is the policy that says council has adopted policies that address. So can we also just get clarification that indeed we want the precursors to be mandatory prior to consideration of.
I'm going to get there. I just didn't want to lose track of the 200 meter conversation. Doug?
I was wondering if we could come back to that one afterwards, because I think the extraordinary community benefit one also impacts on that discussion, at least it does for me.
Okay.
Okay, let's do this one first. Yeah.
So I'll just.
There's go beside, don't pull up too many chairs because we may lose you off the mics too much. Yeah. So here, Aaron, okay, there you go. So should we move on to topic 5? Okay, let's move on to topic 5. So extraordinary community benefits. Matt, do you want to outline this?
Okay,
quickly?
so this is first off the summary of the policy. I'll actually switch to the full text of the policy, but this one, it essentially an extraordinary, it's the definition of what an extraordinary benefit is. Extraordinary benefits must achieve some or all of the following: provide a transformative improvement to the community that takes advantage of either a previously identified or new opportunity, resolves a major community challenge for which no other viable solution exists, and protect core assets critical to the Squamish brand and identity, including but not limited to adventure recreation amenities related to rock climbing, trail running, mountain biking, wind sports, and water sports. And the intention here is to provide a framework for assessing potential benefits that warrant development in development opportunities in future residential neighborhoods. And the idea is to set a high threshold for the benefits that reflect the character of our community. So that's the summary. This is the actual policy language in the document.
So on topic, policy topic 5, and we'll come back to 4. Aaron, did you want to speak to this one? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I would like to say thank you for council and the mayor to allow us to speak. And I'd like to start off by saying that this has been a community effort and a community-driven initiative to have Canada's first mountain biking hub in Squamish. The community is pushing for this because they believe it will allow small businesses to grow. It will allow a connected Squamish to the trail network. And they would also like to see that there be employment lands where biking companies can set up shop near the trail network, and they can test their new technology, service mountain bikers, and also have housing nearby so they can walk to work or take their bike to work and not have to use transit or drive their vehicles. And one point that I would like to bring up is regarding the wording of those of section 9.2F is that it's an and legislation stating that you have to pass the 22,500 threshold and the 6 policies have to be adopted, the 6 precursor policies. What the community wants to see is that if there is a developer that can come forward with employment lands, social housing, senior housing, a daycare facility, a school, that council would be able to consider that application and not say to that developer, oh look, we haven't adopted these 6 precursor policies yet, come back until we adopt these. And there is no direction to the public as to when these 6 policies would be adopted. It could take 5 years or 10 years, because council or staff would never have incentive to adopt these 6 policies as it only applies to future residential landowners. And I understand that council would like to see that these 6 policies are adopted so there's a uniform policy for all of Squamish. But in the meantime, as these policies are being adopted, everyone in Squamish that's inside the growth management boundary could still submit an application to council, and they could say, I'm going to have X amount of housing affordability units, I'm going to have X amount of missing middle housing such as duplexes and triplexes, and then council would negotiate with them in the rezoning phase, and there still wouldn't be that uniform policy until it's adopted. But yet at the same time, you're restricting a future residential landowner that could bring you, duplexes and triplexes. They can bring you employment land. They can bring you the critical trail connectivity that is important to the brand asset of Squamish. They could bring that to you, let's say, once OCP is adopted in May. But council would say, look, we cannot look at this until we adopt these 6 policies. I would suggest that the wording be changed to say, consider these precursor policies, and maybe put the adopted language in a separate section, so council could still work on having these policies put into law, but it wouldn't prevent a future residential landowner coming and bringing a proposal that it would allow the council to look at it and allow that process to begin. Because if you say, oh, wait till these policies come in, maybe the housing affordability will exponentially increase, and you're putting the city behind. So it's something to consider is that council should not fetter its discretion to look at a development application that can bring such extraordinary benefits to the community. It shouldn't prevent itself from looking at it at the end of the day, council still has the full authority to reject or accept the development application, but it shouldn't prevent itself from considering an application.
Thanks, Aaron. And so just the clarity on the process now, we're trying to refine what goes to second reading. Second reading is not what rubber stamped by any means. So the public hearing is, I think, so whatever council decides today in terms of what will go into second reading, there's still lots of public input and process that's happening. And I think what we'd like to, and I appreciate your comment, and council will digest what you said, but in terms of the policy 5, so I'm trying to break this down, otherwise the conversation about 500 directions, we're trying to articulate what extraordinary community benefit might look like. So, as my understanding is you don't have a problem with this particular policy piece.
I think there's a misunderstanding that some councillors thought that 6 precursor policies are extraordinary benefit, but like this is extraordinary benefit, and provide transformative improvement to the communities, like bringing jobs, protecting the core assets, and like giving, protecting the trail connectivity, resolving a major community challenge. That could be anything, right? So.
They're pretty broad.
Yeah, my issue wasn't regarding this, it was
Okay.
more the other policies.
Okay. I thought I had Doug, but I can't remember now.
Yeah.
It was Doug, Ted, Jason, anybody else?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And I kind of struggled with this. This is obviously very subjective, and a year before Quest arrived, nobody envisioned Quest coming, and that was obviously an extraordinary community benefit, and the OC2 was changed. And I wondered how to articulate this and what it might be, and because we don't completely know the future. And the only way I could think of, if it's some guidance or help for you, is to try to describe the baseline. And I looked at the rezoning application that we looked at a couple of weeks ago for Garibaldi Springs. Large chunk of land, diverse housing forms, trail connectivity, active recreation, green space, etc. I mean, not every development has everything, of course. And for me, that's kind of the baseline for any kind of large development coming in. I mean, it just, don't even bother if you're coming in below that standard. So extraordinary community benefit, to me, is something way up above and beyond that. And so it might be of assistance to everybody in the community and investors and so forth, that we kind of describe the things that you expect to see in a development. Obviously general language, and so we're looking for something significantly above that. And I mean, I don't want to talk about one parcel of land, but taking something that might be better suited in the business park and putting it somewhere else by itself is not an extraordinary community benefit. For me, that's a very high standard. That's a very high threshold, and I guess it will be up to the council of the day when every one of those applications comes in to make that decision. But it's not kind of what we saw at Garibaldi Springs. To me, that's not an extraordinary community benefit. That's, as I say, that's business as usual right now in this particular climate.
Yeah, I think we can make a distinction between community amenities that might be garnered out through a development process versus extraordinary community benefit, which opens the door to consideration and different things altogether. Ted,
Yeah,
Jason,
thanks.
Karen.
Just to Doug's note there, how about a piece of property that's got 1,000 people trespassing on it, riding their bikes every weekend? And to your point there, I really liked what you said when you said, and can you just list off those, you said different type of housing, affordable, and then you talked about commercial. I wanted to show council an example.
So, let's say there's a land.
No. We are going to focus on extraordinary community benefit.
Yes.
The particular development focused on what may be proposed in a development.
Yes.
But let's focus on
they will
topic
not,
5.
They will not be heard because we adopted this, and they will not be heard until we've done all this.
We haven't
research.
adopted
Well,
anything.
we've taken it to second reading. Anyway.
No, we haven't taken it to second reading.
This last
First
one,
reading, we're at first
the
reading.
one we last just voted on, just a
Well-
minute ago?
We're taking it to second reading.
Yeah,
The one we just voted on.
yes, it doesn't mean we've adopted
Oh.
anything.
Anyway, I like what you said.
I just want to, we could go in 500 directions on conversation, we need to focus in on the decisions from our council right now. Jason, Karen, Susan.
Well, I mean, I think fundamentally, like, either we have a growth management boundary or we don't. And what is being suggested by some folks at this table is that there should not be, you know, that development should just be considered, you know, wherever there's a private application, and we should just do that. And that's certainly something we could do if we wanted to. I don't know if that's where the community wants to go, and I kind of see this as actually making a little bit of an opening for consideration. I frankly just don't think that we're ready to do a massive greenfield development. I mean, we've really not done that since, I don't know, since West. Yeah, and even that was a very particular thing, but yeah, I guess that's a fairly good example, but yeah. Smaller, but
It's brownfield, it's not greenfield.
yeah,
Completely different.
but I think just on the scale that's envisioned with the size of the parcels that are affected by this, so I think it'll be much better for everybody around the table if we actually have the policies in place, and that it's very clear to landowners and prospective developers what are the expectations, so that everybody is clear about it and they're not, overpaying for land or acquiring land or subdividing land thinking that, there's expectation there. So I think it's up to us as council to be very clear about that, and I think that this policy as articulated by staff has gone a long way to making that a lot more clear.
Thanks. I've got Karen and Susan.
Yeah, I appreciate Doug's comment on trying to set the standard, so what we believe just should come with any good development. So I think that actually makes sense, because it's difficult to define extraordinary, but it's easy to define what we expect now from a good development. The one thing is that this doesn't necessarily talk about employment, and I don't know whether we need to include it in that standard definition, or because I don't think it should just be about residential. I think that we need to keep entertaining these mixed-use neighborhoods, and so I still really like this policy. I think this is where we provide the flexibility to the community and don't fetter future council's choice. But yeah, I think if we can set that standard and maybe talk about employment and mixed-use neighborhoods, that would be.
And I want to focus in on these. Do these articulate adequately extraordinary community benefit to provide enough guidance within the OCP document for anyone looking at the document? So let's focus in on these. Matt, you want to respond, and then I'll go to Susan and Bob.
Just tying in the comments in yours. What I'm hearing is that describing what is a baseline of acceptability is important. And so would you say that given what we've written already, if we add in another point and say that it must substantially exceed our baseline, which is, would that then tie that all together and then be a good definition of extraordinary benefit? I'm just trying to clarify the comments from Councillor Rick's and Elliott.
I think I didn't see it as a point, but I saw it as an introduction to the policy or a preamble to the policy, that smart growth and development, include these kinds of things. It's connected, there's active transportation, we take into account mixed housing, mixed uses of neighborhoods, livability, active transportation.
Thanks. I think our OCP addresses all those things already. I don't think we need redundant policy. I think that those are our core principles in our OCP, and in the entire document speaks to all of those items. I do agree with the point of I was going to say, why does it have to be future residential neighborhoods? It should be all neighborhoods. It shouldn't be just future neighborhoods, not residential neighborhoods. Because I don't want to see any future residential neighborhoods, I want to see mixed-use development, because it says so in my OCP. So the entire community wants mixed-use neighborhoods. So just saying residential actually means that it's going to be just residential neighborhoods, and means that,
Maybe.
and all the other, transformative improvement, these are all vague enough that I don't think it matters whether I say yes or no. You know, like I don't think this actually restricts anything. I think most people know in our branding that rock climbing, trail running, mountain biking, wind sports, and water sports are a part of our brand, and they want to build here because of those things. It's nice to have them actually laid out in that protecting our core assets. So there's nothing in here that challenges me or makes me think of extraordinary. There's nothing extraordinary about the policy. Like there's no extraordinary thing that sets it aside. So, yeah, I don't really understand why being so vague. Like, why not set out some critical standards for
Go ahead.
What would, do you have a?
mixed use? Like, if you feel like our policy already allows for mixed use neighborhoods, or if we've said residential neighborhoods and those neighborhoods are zoned residential, so we can't put any commercial up there, and then it has to be rezoned, I would like to see policy ensure that there's employment land in all new massive residential neighborhoods. So if we could provide an extraordinary benefit of employment lands, or is that, do you feel like you've already addressed that? Go ahead.
So the future residential neighborhoods, certainly, if that's not the right term, we can change that. But in the description of it, it is essentially saying that it will become residential neighborhood. And residential neighborhood in our definition actually can encompass many things. It can encompass employment land and neighborhood, and we could expand that. In fact, it's a good point. Is that the only thing we want up there? Probably not, just residential. So we can work on that and fix
So
that piece.
my understanding is the reference to future residential neighborhood is a specific reference to certain things that are actually on the map in the OCP.
Yes.
Very specific. It's not defining it as it's all going to be residential. Those are going to be further developed through the OCP.
And sub-area plan.
Sub-area plan and actual development application rezoning. So, and those philosophies or those visions are actually articulated quite well in the OCP.
Yes. Yeah.
So this is simply trying to set out criteria by which we would open the door for consideration of something outside of our growth management boundary. And I think you can't get too specific on this because we need to leave the quests of the world or the whatever opportunities of the world out there for us to consider. So transformative improvement, yes, there's subjectivity to that, but basically it's saying something beyond status quo or beyond normal. Resolve a major community challenge, that might be a transportation challenge, that might be a watershed challenge, that might be a whole bunch of different things, and protects the core assets that are critical to who we are and why we live here. I think, I want us to zero in on those three things. I think those three things give us the parameters, and if anyone disagrees with that, that's the hand I want to see up. If you agree with that, let's move on to the next policy piece. You disagree with it?
No, I have a question.
Okay, question.
To council, would it help in the first point, transformative improvement, in more than one of the following, like social, environmental, economic health? So that would it help to define that transformative piece more, or is it best to keep it vague? So you would have to.
Yeah, so I'll let council
That's my
think in
question.
their minds about that. I've got Bob, and then I have Peter, and then I have Doug, and then we need to move on.
Thank you. Jason brought up the very good point. He said, this has to be in the policy, whatever the rest issues. I want to remind council and Jason, when we bought this land, threshold was only 20,000 people. And this was raised then to 22,500. You know what I'm saying? So beyond what are we working with last 5 years, I want to be very clear to council. This table, we have a meeting with Doug and others. We promised the community we're going to address this issue, lingering on 509, 510 on land. I'm going to be talking Pacific on land because that was the community through brought this up in this table, and we sit in this table, and there was, going back and forth with access issues and all that, and there was, we was moving last couple of years, and comparing to last year, we was moving forward. this issue will be addressed through the OCP, and that's the time there right now, we are on that time, and that's want to remind the council, what we promised the community, we would address that issue. To my best of knowledge, what I'm hearing today, we're never addressing that one issue, and we are raising the threshold to 34,000 on that land, and we adding on other more things to make it difficult, make that issue go away, and we making it worse. So we gotta deal with issue with amongst our land, with our policy and everything, and that's sitting in like 60 days. So I just want to remind the council what we done, what we promised the community in this table, especially the biking community, to deal with that issue. And there was, we told over and over we would deal through the OCP. The OCP is there right now today, and I don't think so we're addressing not even one issue on that, what we have an issue with last 5 years. So that's a good reminder to council before they're making any decision. And we know, like I talk to individual, yourself, Patty, and Doug, and Ted, and Susan, what those issues are, and there's very serious issue. So we don't want to be beyond. You want to talk about that? We can have a closed meeting, myself and with my legal team. So that's all I'm going to say.
So Bob brings up an interesting point about these thresholds and how with different OCP reviews, they may or may not change. They may go up, they may go down, depending on
People bother
pressures. Bob, please don't interrupt me. Thank you. So maybe just speak to what a threshold means and how does it get reevaluated through every 5 to 7 years in an OCP review, and why it might be recalibrated as it was in the example that Bob said.
This is related to the
Yeah. And I don't want to speak specifically to this, but philosophically, why would the threshold change? I mean, I think I know the answer, but I don't want to.
So with every OCP update, especially with an overhaul like this, we have an opportunity to reconsider where we're at in terms of the community's evolution, the growth, how much available capacity we still have, consider the suite of growth management policies and tactics that we're using, or tools that we have to use. And so with this OCP update, as council's aware, we took a look at what, and re-looked at what the available capacity is, what the absorption and build out of the existing areas has been, excuse me, and then reconsidered that with the thresholds that were existing at the time, and then through the process, we solicited input from the community around different options. One was, the status quo, maintaining the current 22.5, and then we looked at additional options that would grow the upper population threshold to the 34,000. And then as we looked at sort of a hybridized option of maintaining some sort of lower threshold to kind of backstop and continue to focus on infill, and then that's where the policy precursor suggestion came, and we developed that. So I mean, back to the original point is that we continuously consider our growth and what's happening, and that at every OCP review, and also there's an opportunity with significant shifts internally and externally. The council of the day can always identify or direct staff to reconsider or relook at this in a substantial way, so that option is always available.
And can I add just one thing to that? And I think part of it too is that the 20,000 was an expected infill capacity at the time, and in the OCP update there was a reevaluation of the infill capacity, and it was determined there was additional capacity, and I think that's what's happening right now, is that that 34 is coming from a reevaluation of infill capacity, with the ongoing theme through all of the OCPs of trying to finish the infill before moving beyond.
And in 5 years from now, when we redo this all over again, likely that threshold would be reevaluated, might go up, might go down, depending on where we are in terms of growth. Correct?
Exactly, yeah.
I have Peter and then Doug, and then we need to move forward because we still have topic 5.
My question's been answered.
Okay, Doug.
I was just going to make the comment about the future residential neighborhood discussion. And I can understand in the language broadening out the word residential to include mixed use, but I think we have to be careful because I don't think we envision heavy industry going up there. And so keep in mind the OCP is a vision document, and we don't want to send the wrong vision out to the community or to future investors. So we can talk about mixed use neighborhoods and so forth, and I think maybe that's part of our standard now for large developments that I talked about earlier, even though I don't think it shows up in Garibaldi Springs, but it does in Waterfront Landing, for example, in SODC. But I wouldn't kind of just throw it over.
I mean, unless we want to change what the designation of those areas is called, this is just simply the name of what we called those areas. If we want to change that, that's a whole other conversation.
Future development, or whatever, yeah, but you're right. I wouldn't get too hung up on that.
Yeah. Bob, did you have
Yes.
something to add?
Yeah, I want to go back to, when the threshold and 20,000, that's the time the planning department, Cameron was here. Between myself and Cameron, we should have some material. It was strictly when we was talking to them, he was worried we will come early and then before the university start, they want to give them the kickstart. That was the fundamentally behind issue, was that what putting threshold was on my land was 20,000, time Cameron time. My understanding, and I should have some in the writing too, there was to give them the kickstart for up to 20,000 people threshold. This was the came behind talking back and forth in that time. That's the real issues. We want to give them enough time to start kickstart. They can build around the university. That was the key to put the
From 20 up to 22,500?
Yeah, no, to put 20,000. When he
Okay.
asked me, what do you think? We want to do, I said, oh, I agree. I said, okay, this is good for Squamish, good for us, good for everybody. Now that this can be an issue, and that's come from 20, we bought the land based on the agree on that, and that going to 22,005, now there's going to go to 34,000. I think we are missing a lot of pieces where this came from. My understanding with the time is Cameron at that time, it was different than what we are bringing this issue right now today.
Thanks, Bob. I think we need to make sure we have the timelines correct on that, but anyway, I don't have any more speakers, so I didn't hear, other than people were worried about future residential being ambiguous. Karen had a question about should we augment the transformative improvement to include some more qualifiers or some more guidance? So council should reflect on that. But I generally hear that this, in essence, is acceptable. Go ahead.
I know this is going back, but I've just looked at, in the actual OCP at Missing Middle. And we are asking for a lot of things in this policy, and I'm looking at the missing middle housing, and we don't have any policy, so it's gonna be quite a while before we change. Took forever just to get a height variance so we could build our flood construction level in the downtown. So, like, just looking at the missing middle and the amount of policy that's needed.
Yeah, we're on this one?
Yeah, but we're just passing this based on the last policy as well?
No, they're not really interdependent.
Okay, but there's so many.
Yeah, Karen?
I was going to move a motion that we include policy topic 5 in the second reading, with consideration of some of the feedback that staff heard.
Second.
By Doug, moved by Karen. Everyone understand what, in the feedback, just so maybe staff articulate the feedback you've heard? I think it's particularly around number 1, but I just want to make sure that's not vague and then something comes back that council didn't.
I can articulate.
Well, just,
No, Matt, go.
Okay. So some of the feedback I heard was there was a piece giving a contextual start to it, talking about what the baseline is, making sure that we understand that it has to be extraordinary beyond a baseline, and maybe mention a few of the key elements that need to be incorporated as a baseline. And then on the transformative improvement could mention a range of values that it may apply to.
That maybe are articulated within the OCP, like
Social,
environmental, cultural, economic health, some of those.
Okay. but Ted's here.
Yeah, this, what's written on that page right there, I don't mind that.
Thank you.
It's the stuff before.
Sue?
Yeah, I would agree the same thing, the stuff before, just trying to integrate what was before to actually what it says in our OCP, I'm having great difficulty with. And I think that if you're changing the language in this, it should go back, it should stay at first reading and not be adopted until you come back with those changes. I think that it's responsible to go back to the public, adopting it to second reading without going to the public and making changes in it, you need to bring back those changes and not
That's
say,
not the
I promise those
correct direction,
changes. And
So there's a motion on the floor, topic 5, all those in favor?
Is adopting it to second reading, is that
Topic 5,
of
Not
adopting?
passing second reading.
Not just to bring it.
that this would be brought forward to second reading. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Can I just add a comment?
Yeah.
Just on I, we've got the 5 goal areas in the OCP, and so it might be actually those 5 goal areas rather than
Yeah.
making something up, so linking it back, as Councillor Chappelle says, to policy that's already adopted.
Yes.
I just heard Mr. Chima talk about the history. And I do feel as though that's very important that council understands where we were 15 years ago when we were all fighting to get university in this town. And there was all sorts of things that went on back then, and then next transformation to bring us up to now, and we're making decisions now without understanding all that, and I think that may be unfair.
Let's move on to, okay.
All right.
Do you want to, maybe I'll just get staff to frame this and then.
Yeah. Okay, so item 6, we're bringing up, this has been in the document since the discussion draft, but hasn't been discussed at council. And then following some discussion that occurred at council table in recent, I think within the last month, we felt it was important to make sure that we brought this up for discussion. It says, do not support major destination resort community development outside of the district's growth management boundary or on the periphery of the district of Squamish boundary. The idea is to, or the intention is to direct residential growth either within Squamish or on the boundary of Squamish to really try and ensure that the growth in our area is directed to within our growth management boundary. And it also reflects, although we did not do consultation on major resort development outside of the district boundary, in the public consultation, we did receive some comments related to potential resort development on the periphery, which were negative. And so based on that and our growth management intention, we included this policy. But we'd like to know if this is something council is supportive of.
I have Ted, Jason,
Well, I don't know if anyone read the newspaper and the letters to the editor, but I think this is, it's such a big topic in the community that if we put wording like that in there, it's very unfair to spring that on everybody without a fairly substantial consultation.
Jason.
Yeah, for me, I think that this policy, just as it's currently worded, I understand the intention, and I actually support the intention, which is we don't want residential sprawl under the guise of major destination resort. But I feel like the actual policy statement actually excludes things that we may wish to consider. And going back to that principle that the plan recognizes and supports significant employment generating activities outside the growth management boundaries. So, you know, if there was the case that a particular destination resort was primarily a non-residential use, that to me, I wouldn't feel comfortable ruling that out in this policy. And to me, that's what the way the current wording is. It seems that we're sort of specifying that, and I'd like to see us maybe specify, maybe we want to, I don't know. I mean, there was that language, obviously, that the SLRD used to have, and I thought myself that some of that language was pretty good because they talked a lot about how, you know, it has to be primarily non-residential focused, and I would agree that the both the impacts in terms of our fiscal situation as well as the potential for jobs is affected by the type of destination resort it is. You know, whether it's, you know, some piddly little ski hill with like 3,000 homes attached to it, or if it's a really comprehensive, mostly hotel and short-term stay in a very confined footprint. And I see those things as kind of different, because a destination resort, generally speaking, is not something that you have in the middle of town usually. So I'm just looking for ways to do that, recognizing that there's not consensus in town. Like, I feel like destination resort development is one of those, again, very divisive issues, and I don't think we'd ever get to complete consensus on it. So those are my thoughts when I first saw this. It kind of triggered some of that thought process.
Jason, Susan and Karen.
Thanks. I would absolutely agree with those sentiments. We want to encourage jobs in the community and resort destinations. I think that with the growth of Vail to the north is going to be really restrictive for, and not affordable for families. I think that I would, you know, it's whether I support it or not, I don't feel like we've gone through a fair public process. We've never gone through a public process. We didn't on the regional growth boundary, on the regional language in the SLRD either. I don't feel like the First Nations even knows that this has been added and has been consulted with us. So I think that in terms of reconciliation, that this policy has not been vetted by our First Nations. And
We're
that
doing a
it's
consultation process with the First Nations.
I think this got added very recently, so I don't think it's gone through the same robust public consultation as the rest of the OCP. So I don't support this policy as it reads now.
I'm just gonna go back to Ted quickly, not Ted. Matt, quickly.
Guys are like very easy to confuse.
And I think there seems to be some confusion about what the intention is. It does read like slam door, we do not support resort development. So what was the intention behind this policy?
The intention was really to restrict residential development sprawling beyond the growth management boundaries. And I think probably our description of destination resort community is not adequate to reflect that, and that it would be something that we could certainly tune up. We, in our work with SLRD, we certainly on the steering committee, we certainly have expressed support for recreation opportunities in the periphery. Things like the gondola are recognized as being a great asset and adding to our brand and value of the community. And it's really the community or the sprawling residential piece that we need to address.
Can we say sprawling residential
Absolutely.
development instead of community development?
Absolutely, yeah.
For example.
That language can be changed for sure.
So it's more defining what it is as opposed to slamming it open.
Absolutely.
Karen and Doug.
Okay, so we're still talking within our district, but just outside the urban container boundary. Because I don't want to have a policy that contradicts the SLAD. So we're talking about
Well, we
within, well, exactly. So we're talking within our boundaries, but outside the container.
Just to clarify, it does say that outside the district's boundary or on the periphery. It does extend to beyond the boundary of the district of Squamish. And that is with the proposed changes that are being made to the SLRD RGS. This would be consistent with those changes that have been proposed and I believe will be made in the coming months. So it would be consistent, but it does extend beyond our boundary. And you know, that is a decision for council if they do want to make commentary about areas beyond our boundary.
I kind of thought that the SLD would cover that. I think that we can be more clear, as my colleagues have said, around if it creates jobs, if it's not about massive residential development, if it's about truly a tourist enclave, I'm more supportive of it. But if it's just a land grab to build houses, then, so I think that's the clarifying language that I would like to see there, is that it's really about jobs and developing the tourism economy, not about housing.
I have Doug, Susan, did I see Jason? And then we've got Rebecca.
So I wondered if this was necessary, given the other policies we're thinking of putting in. So for example, when you're talking about something in the periphery, you're talking about something that's not contiguous with the growth management boundary. And if I understood the previous discussions correctly, the only development that we might consider outside of the growth management boundary was developments that were contiguous to the growth management boundary. I think that was one of the qualifiers, as well as the extraordinary community benefit and everything. So something like a Garibaldi at Squamish, to let the elephant out of the room, if that's the expression. Put the elephant in the room. Or talk about the one that's been here all along. Would not qualify just because it's not contiguous, which is one of the big issues with that development, is the fact that it's 5 or 7 kilometers up the road somewhere. So whether we need that, and if it was purely or substantially employment-based, as Councillor Blackman-Wolf is talking about, then I think there's already, once again, I'm trying to recall the exact language, there's already exceptions for things that might be outside the growth management area, period. Because it's not residential-based, it's, I forget what the word was, industrial or employment-based or something like that. So those things could happen anyway. We wouldn't necessarily need to. We might try to clarify that some of these employment-based things have to be substantially employment and not just tacked on to a huge residential development or something like that. But we might try to clarify that language. So that would generally apply anywhere. But apart from that, I just wonder whether, we haven't really gone to consultation on this, and whether we really, in fact, do need it. I take staff's point that we did have the discussion, and I think it's good to have this discussion here, but I just wonder whether we need to actually put it in the OCP as it is.
I think everyone's on side with, we don't want to encourage land grab, sprawl, residential. Does anyone disagree with that?
Sounds so inviting,
So if the language says we don't support sprawling residential, maybe that's the simple qualifier for this one in terms of, it's a fiscal issue, it's an infrastructure issue, big picture. But if it is supporting all these other things people have talked about, then in theory, it's open for consideration. But focus in on the sprawling residential. If that language is in this policy, is this something that people could live with? Or think it's at least to the point where it can go to second reading and get public feedback? I'll let people think about that. I have Susan, then Jason, then Ted.
I'm wondering about the Bahani Resort, it's outside our, it's like on the borders of our
It's
district.
already zoned. It's already in the OCP, it's already zoned.
And it is inside the growth management boundary.
And it's already zoned, it doesn't have any permissions.
Okay, perfect.
I think there's one small piece that's not, but.
Yeah, and I just want to, whether I support it or not, or whether we support it, I just think that the elephant in the room of the gas resort, however it is needs to go to the public. We can all decide on what we think about it or whatever, but before it goes to the public, I can't really make any decisions on it. And that, my problem is all the language going without public consultation more than anything. I really think that inform is not the level that we want the policy to be.
This is not inform at this point.
This is right now sitting, like, it has not gone through the pizza parties or anything else. This was not in here before, and now it's in here now. After the SLAD language got added, this got added, so I
Can you
really.
clarify that?
Just to clarify, it was in the discussion draft, which was quite some time ago. It has been in there for quite some time. It hasn't received attention.
I don't think anybody knew it was, I certainly didn't know that it was in our OCP, so. But I also think about Whistler was developed for, like Whistler is a great community. It was developed exactly like that, where we put residential is, and OCPs are decided on all the time, but just having that public input on it, and then I'd be happy to see it as a residential sprawl removal and more employment lands.
So the OCP in this context is putting a lens on the evaluation. and that our intention is to not have sprawl. That this isn't a land grab sprawl, that if
I think
this
that
is truly
all
a
that
result
language
of
is
resort development, that it goes through a different lens. What I heard from that, this policy topic was designed to ensure that we're putting a lens on the sprawl piece of it. That's what I heard from Matt, so I just want to make sure.
And I
Whether or
think-
not we agree with the project or not, there's all sorts of process in the future that's going to happen on this. So,
Sorry.
yeah. Go ahead.
And I think we can rewrite it to better articulate that piece, to stipulate that residential sprawl in any form, and here it's talking about as associated with a resort recreation, or recreation resort, is not desirable, but we can make sure that we don't exclude the idea of recreation resort, recreation amenities. Does that make sense?
Jason, Ted, somebody else.
Well, it's me, but I'm fine.
Jason.
Yeah, I think staff will be able to hopefully just kind of rejig that language, and I'll support that. And the actual intent bullet, is that going to be in the draft? Because I know in the staff report, under each policy, there's an intent, which is not shown here. Is that actually going in the document, the intent?
The intentions were strictly to try and explain to council the nature behind those. They aren't intended to be in the document, the OCP itself.
So yeah, so maybe obviously then for number 6, somehow incorporating a lot of the things that are listed in the intent, kind of moving it in that direction. And I do actually support the idea of leaving the periphery of the District of Squamish boundary, because I think that I would suspect that council, if there was a proposal that was on the fringes of the boundary, that council would want the opportunity to be involved in that process, whether it's through, the community and all of that, and not, just leaving it in the hands of, SLRD, just deal with it or whatever. I think there is a desire to actually, especially for things that are what would be considered the periphery, I think a reasonable person would interpret that to include, stuff like Garibaldi and Squamish. So I think that's an important thing to leave in there.
Peripheral development is always an issue for any community.
Yeah.
100%. Thanks, Jason. Ted?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I do though worry if we don't put the word gas or Garibaldi and Squamish, people won't know what we're talking about. And I've been inundated with conversations recently about the SLRD growth boundaries and wording that was changed a while ago. And I assured everybody there was public consultation, but boy, they sure didn't agree with me. And so it has to be cleared in there. I mean, Garibaldi and Squamish has been around for 20 years. And if we don't mention it, we don't use the words, we're going to read over it, which has happened in the past recently.
A little off topic, so go ahead.
Through the chair, I disagree. This is about setting policy for the whole district, not just for a project. So if someone came forward to build the first off-grid, fully carbon neutral hotel somewhere on the periphery, I would be interested in seeing that. So I think the policy needs to be general. It can't mention specific projects. That's the intent of the OCP, is to provide a broad framework. So I'm happy with the discussion. I'm happy to see this slightly changed. So should we put a motion forward, or do we just want staff to?
I think there's some quite a bit of wordsmithing that needs to happen on this one. So maybe with the feedback, come back with something else for council to consider. And I generally agree, if someone reads this policy and doesn't know that it may be talking about something like Garibaldi Squamish, then I would be shocked.
And they're not as smart as you?
Well, no, it's not. Or it's not an issue. And I want that I'm going to cut you off if you're not on topic.
I am right on top.
Awesome. Come here.
Can I stand or do I need to sit?
You have to sit, sorry.
Here, you want?
That's
okay, I got a chair. I just wanted to bring to council's attention that when you talk about a destination resort, and Susan, or I'm sorry, Councillor Elliott said, a hotel that's off-grid, blah, blah, blah. There's a 13-acre parcel that sits just inside the park boundaries. That's for sale at $1.2 million. Is that the kind of resort destination thing that you would be opposed to?
Well, it's hard to know without seeing any proposal in front of
Well,
us.
this is very general, and if it does go forward in this fashion, then it would include that piece of property. And
I think what
without
council's-
realizing that it's even there.
Yeah. And we're not making it specific to any parcel, but I think what council is trying to do is align the intention of what staff sort of said what the intention of this was, because we're saying this policy language right now is in alignment with the intention, which is really to articulate our desire for smart growth, reducing sprawl, and that's the lens by which we'll evaluate whether or not something goes through. So that's, but I hear you. It wasn't trying to say yes or no to any particular. Susan, your turn.
Yeah, I keep hearing tourism economy everywhere, and I wonder how we're gonna build a tourism economy without having some
Okay.
growth, but like hotels, and is there some sort of language that we can put for accommodation? You know, no residential, but accommodation?
This doesn't stop that.
This doesn't stop it.
Well, as long as it has destination resort in it, it will present as hotels or, so anything that's employment is.
This is this is where we need the refinement of the languages. This is intended to articulate, we do not see a resort with a massive amount of residential sprawl. And that's what this policy, so I think just the intention of the language needs to get fine-tuned, and I think you guys, hear us on that one.
Yes.
I'm good. Okay. All right,
Next.
we are so over time. Go.
Okay, the next one. Do not extend municipal water and sewer servicing to areas located above an elevation of 200 meters unless for public health reasons. This policy.
We were gonna have a map with this. Do you have a map?
Yes, I do. But I actually want to read you something from engineering first. This reflects consultation with engineering and operations departments. To service above 200 meters would require new pump stations and reservoirs to provide the conveyance and storage necessary for domestic water service and fire protection, which will cost the district more in the long run versus infill. Can this be done? Yes. Is it more expensive for the district to operate, maintain, and eventually replace over time? Yes. Overall, developing above 200 meters will require additional infrastructure versus developing lower down where the new infrastructure is not needed. And this is a policy that does exist. We did check in with their departments at the outset of the OCP. This has come up again. We've done more check-in with them, and the response is that really if we want to keep costs down over time, staying lower is better. It's along the lines of our info policies. To provide some detail on where where the 200 meter elevation boundary is. The yellow is the 200 meter elevation boundary. The pink with black hatching, which unfortunately is not the most clear, but the pink with black hatching is the
Future residential.
Future residential, although I see one, the Thunderbird land is encompassed in there and it shouldn't be. But in general, the pink with black hatching is the future residential neighborhood. The yellow is the 200 meter boundary, and that's an overview. I actually am going to bring it in a little bit closer so you can see some specific parcels. At the north end there is District Lot 509, 510. You can see that the northeastern portion and a little bit along the eastern boundary is about 200 meters.
Don't you live above 200?
Yeah, I was just looking and seeing the websites was in there.
I thought it was actually.
Yeah, pretty close. And then
I think you're just below it.
Let's charge you more.
You're just below it, Councillor Wing.
Just below?
And it looks like you're just below it, I think.
So essentially most 70%, maybe more of the future residential is under 200 meters.
that's correct.
Any questions about this one? Don't see any, okay.
So move conclusion.
Move, Councillor Reyes, second by Councillor Chappelle, all those in favor, opposed, motion carries. I think the map was really helpful because I think it was really unknown if this is 50% of land or 20% of land or. Okay.
We The only thing left for us then is the 22,500, which was tabled, I believe.
It was, okay, let's come back to it.
I didn't vote on that last time.
Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Aaron, I'll let you speak. One of you, pick
Yeah,
which one.
I'll skip that. So what's the procedure to have a closed meeting with council? Because the reason is biker community is coming to us to how do we
We
can create.
have a policy, we don't meet with private developers in camera. Yeah, it's just something we don't do from a policy point of view. Is that fair to say, Robin?
I would actually say it's not a council policy, it's against the community charter.
Yeah, so if there is an issue that has to go through a different process, then it's your prerogative to go through whatever process that will be.
You can meet one-on-one.
Oh, okay. So that's the best way to go then. So,
Yeah, we just can't go in camera, it's illegal.
or we can talk on the camera, doesn't have to be, because it's gonna be access issues, because we can beat the drum over and over, because they're sending us the letter for access, we don't know where we stand and where the OCP stands, so that's why I wanna make sure, because.
I think council is very cognizant of that issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's
And, yeah, I think we're very cognizant
one more.
of the land trespass / legal issues. I think we're very cognizant.
I have 2 points I'd like to bring up. In the last meeting that we had on this topic, there were a few councillors that said they support maintaining the 22.5 cap because it's consistent with the old OCP, and they would not like to move the goalposts. And after the meeting, I got a few dozen, like 2 dozen phone calls and emails, a combination, and people said we're a bit confused that there's 3 councillors or so that are saying that they want to remain consistent with the old OCP and support the 22.5 threshold, yet they're saying they're putting the 34,000 cap on. They're putting supporting a new definition of extraordinary benefits and the 6 precursor policies. And they said, isn't that equivalent to moving the goalposts? And they're saying that they don't want to move the goalposts and support the 22.5 cap. And just so the public can know, would council be able to explain to them how that's not moving the goalposts on the current future residential landowners?
And maybe I read this wrong, but my interpretation of what councillors were saying about not moving the goalpost was, we've gone through the whole process talking about, and particularly in the last 2 months, talking about 22,500 and 34. So moving the goalpost within this parameter, that what goes to the public for public hearing we don't all of a sudden shift dramatically one direction or the other. That what goes to second reading, public hearing, absolutely council may decide to change after the public hearing process, may decide to change things. But in terms of the process, these big policy pieces like this, you have it in there, you're going to have a whole bunch of people who don't want it react to it. You take it out, you're going to have a whole bunch of people who want to keep it in. So if we keep consistent, and this is just my read on what I heard, and then maybe I'm articulating this, we keep it consistent through the process, goes to public hearing with that consistent, and then we heard very clearly at the public hearing, people who are for it or against it. So that's what I heard in terms of consistency, not so much consistency for the last 3 OCPs or anything like that. And did I read that wrong?
No, that's right.
That, okay.
My second point is, let's say nothing changes in OCP, the current wording is kept, and there is a landowner that says they can bring in employment lands, social housing, basically provide an extraordinary community benefit as defined, currently defined, and the population threshold hasn't reached 22.5, and 6 policies haven't been adopted, and they say, council, we have these benefits. What would council say to that landowner? Sorry, we cannot look at your application, or what would be the answer?
The current framework, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, was that it would not be considered until such time as...
So council would be willing to give up on immediate extraordinary community benefit.
That's,
So if land development can give the city brand asset, can provide missing middle housing such as duplexes, triplexes, courtyard, apartments, multifamily, can provide a steep slope assessment, can provide a wildfire protection plan, can provide...
You don't have to list them all, Aaron, we
Yeah,
know.
so if they can provide all that, and council would say, sorry, we cannot look at this application.
What the OCP, council would say, the OCP currently prioritizes within the growth management boundary, within, and that's where the priority is, until such time as the population. That's what the current policy says. As written in the first draft, not yet adopted, so yes. That is in theory what the OCP says. Is that fair enough to say?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Point of order. Council can look at it. It doesn't say council can't look at it. That's what she says.
Well, it would take a majority of council of the day to come in and say, we could look at it. From a staff policy point of view, an application would come in the door and staff would say, come back at 22,500 or come back in a year.
That's how the university got in, I forget.
Yeah, so if a majority of council in any given year decides anything, they can change the OCP. But from a procedural point of view, it would actually not go into the staff's work plan unless that had happened.
How can you come forward to council if staff will say, no, the council will not look at this application?
Any member of council can put forward a notice of motion. If it gets seconded, it gets debated. That's currently kind of procedural. That's how. Karen Dunn. If I got that wrong, wait, hold on a second.
Just to clarify, if an application is made to staff, regardless of its level of compliance with the policy or not, we still would bring it to council for some commentary. Council would then, and we would say, staff would say, if the policies are as drafted, we would say, this does not meet the policies that are drafted, and so we do not recommend consideration of this, if that was the situation. But council has the discretion to say, we do want to bring it forward or not.
Yep. Karen,
So just to clarify, Matt, does it require an OCP change to entertain it as the policy is written?
No, it would not require an OCP change to consider it, but for council to talk about it, an application comes forward, first reading starts, that would not require the OCP change to predate that or to happen before that. But as the policy, as that application was moving forward, it would be an OCP amendment. And so if council can consider that, if they adopt it, then it's then consistent with the OCP and zoning can follow with it.
But in order to entertain it, we would have to change OCP policy, which is not waiting for the threshold and not having the policy precursors in place. So that is the OCP amendment we would have to make first.
I don't think so. I believe that council always has the opportunity to consider an application that comes forward, regardless of its level of consistency with the OCP or not. Council can consider it. You can't make a zoning bylaw change that is inconsistent with the OCP, but this, as they consider this application, if that was adopted, it would then immediately be consistent with the OCP. It would be an OCP amendment being considered.
That is my understanding too. Doug?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think I said that earlier. I think any council can, at any time, can just amend the OCP. And it could get to us in a variety of different ways. And for example, last term, there was an application on behalf of Mr. Shima to remove the 22,500 cap from his property. And I don't know the exact route that it got here, but somehow it got in front of us and we debated it and voted on it and didn't go with it. So, in considering this issue, I didn't have a question, I'm commenting now. The thing that was most compelling to me was the statement about the pause. All the other things going on, we need policy work, sub-area plans in other neighborhoods, etc. And of all the pro and con discussions we've had around this threshold and these precursors, that was the one that kind of grabbed me. And I wonder, one of my concerns about that is the precursors, and I've stated it, the precursors could somehow just get lost in work plans and so forth and not happen in a relatively prompt way. And so I tossed out, how about we have them in a couple of years? But really, I think when you kind of distill through all of this, I think what we're talking about is a pause. And we might consider just forget the 22.5, forget the precursors from the OCP, and just say we're going to have a pause on development outside the growth management area for 3 years. And that will allow staff time to get policy in place, because once again, if they don't, then we're not prepared for the next application. But just deal with it in a different way. But I think that's the value of it. It lets us get all this other stuff there. The justification for it is that we are presently facing an unprecedented amount of development pressure. And we have to catch up. We've been trying to catch up over the last couple of years. It has just become impossible. I take Mr. Chima's point about what the threshold was when he bought the property, but there is no guarantee on zoning. There is no guarantee when you buy property that you will get developed at a certain point. There is no guarantee that you will ever get development rights. That is just not something that can be there. There's speculative risk anytime those types of properties are purchased. The mood of this community has changed significantly since the time that property was purchased. Smart growth was adopted. There's a whole bunch of other things that have come to play, and that happens. And I think you just have to accept that. So I think really what we're talking about is just call it a 3-year pause on consideration of OCP or development applications outside the growth management area, except for the exceptions noted for employment lands, etc. And just stop there. And to answer the previous question, yes, and so if the next council thought, well, that's too much, and by the way, this really neat application just showed up, they always have the ability to just unpause it and carry on after that. So I know it's maybe not dealing directly with the issue, but I think that's maybe an alternate way of dealing with these things. And it gives a little bit of certainty, I think, to people. And keep in mind, at the end of 3 years, that doesn't mean the doors are thrown open, because the $34,000 person threshold is still there, and the requirement for extraordinary community benefit is still there outside the growth management area until some future council might decide to adjust the growth management area.
If I was a landowner that had my cat moved 3 times, I'd be super threshold. No, because it was a cat.
No,
It was
it's
like
always
cat,
been a
cat,
threshold.
threshold.
It's always
Cat,
a
thrush, right, exactly.
It's always been a threshold.
However, it is. It's like, it's an arbitrary number and with arbitrary policy that I'm looking through the OCP and trying to align what I just read with what I'm reading in our thing and remembering to myself that just getting 2 to 3 for laneway homes changed took 3 years. So to accept that we're going to get this massive amount of policy work done in any time that's beneficial to our community, and I'm not talking about having arbitrary 3-year, 2-year, or setting a time limit, because I think time limits are disrespectful to the community that may want projects going forward, that may want things to happen, that may want growth. And this is a council that just moved forward greenfield development 2 weeks ago. So first reading.
Please
So-
be factual in what you're saying.
I am being factual. I'm reading the OCP.
You're being
Just looking at the missing middle housing forms, there's so much policy just for that one piece that needs to happen. That it's, I can't even imagine how long that's going to take. So putting 6 policy precursors in,
So on the 22,500.
and on the 22.5, just arbitrary caps, and that I'm happy to keep it at 22.5, but I'm not happy to move it to 35.
Ted?
Holy cow.
So, for the last 6 years that I've been here, I've probably voted on 20 or more OCP changes. So they're not absolutely uncommon. And, I don't like, there's gonna be a new council in 8 months. I don't want to do stuff that is going to just be a big burden to them. Because it's not going to be all of us, it might be a few of us. And so for that reason, I don't like the 3-year thing. You know, because we're saying, you know,
I agree that, I think the 3-year thing, sorry, with all due respect, Councillor Race, was,
so I mean, and I've been here long enough that I know I fought for the 22.5. I fought for it. And I know how hard that was, and it affected a few developments extremely. But that's what our advice was at the time. So then everyone backed off since then. We got the university, we got all this other stuff. So I'm going to say I'm okay at the 22.5 because that's what I said. But after that, I'm not okay with that. That's why I don't like all these other rules that are being added. But as long as a development can go to a council and say, listen, we want to bring this forward, and if it's written up there that you can't, but you actually can, then there's hope for.
Jason.
Well, I was actually going to say that I was actually kind of okay with Councillor Race's proposal, just because of its simplicity and the clarity, and then I think that also sort of sends a signal to council in the future that, okay, we have this sort of deadline, and we need to make sure that the work program for staff is such that we can get to that goalpost. And then, but also, if the future council decides, no, we don't want that anymore, I mean, it's very easy to just say no, you know, and people may campaign on that and say we want no control, whatever. So I'm okay to entertain that, but I'm also okay to keep with the 22.5. So I think that they're both reasonable solutions, and I think the 3 years kind of has some resonance given what we heard from staff in terms of timelines of what they've completed so far and anticipation. So.
But the challenge I had with what Councillor Ray said was, he said get rid of everything else. I think the precursors are the important piece.
And then I misunderstood, yeah.
Maybe I misunderstood.
Well, I did say that, but not with the idea that they completely get lost, but that staff go away and fix them or do them before the 3 years is over. I mean, I agree with the precursors, absolutely. I'm not debating that. But don't make it a condition of opening up development. So it does force future councils and staff to stick to a timeline to get those things done. And as I look at them,
Okay,
it
that
would
was
have to be,
helpful.
yeah, no, don't, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to leave that impression. But I don't think you need to state them then, because they'll just go away and do them, or we want them to do them. Because I think if this was going to get traction and was going to go through, then the follow-up motion would be to direct staff to complete the precursors within the 3-year period. And so it does hit budgets, it does hit work plans, it does hit all of these things, so that we make sure that those things are accomplished within that 3-year period.
What if those things are accomplished in 2 years?
Well, that's great. And then the council of the day, if they think that they're
Okay.
caught up in their policy and everything, they can just shorten it and unpause it.
Peter, then, I think it says Karen.
I agree to hold it 22.5. I think that, and to Doug's point about the 3 years, well, in maybe 2+ years, we're going to be at that threshold anyway. So.
Karen, then Ted.
I still support having this in here. It's been in our consultation all the way along. I think if the community really objects to it, we'll hear about it at public hearing, but I think it'd be unfair to take this out. And I think it makes sense to me. It's measurable. If there's a place we can go to get that number, it allows for the policy to take place. I actually think we're very good at accomplishing policies. So I'm happy to have this stay.
Ted?
Yeah, I'm just worried about the accomplishing policy bit, and I do feel as though, you know, like I say, I fought for the 22.5, and I would fight for that being the timeline that the people that were stuck by that got to do something. And that's just because I was here and went to it all. The 3-year pause would take that out. It wouldn't be an opportunity, well, it would be with the next council. what I like about this is it still leaves the door open.
But there's always technically doors open, there's always. depending on-
Well, not with the precursors. Just one of those precursors.
There's always technically doors open
Okay.
for councils to decide in the future. This is a guidance document, this is a vision document. I'm gonna move forward that we keep this in here for second reading. Public's gonna weigh in as they should, and we want them to. It's a huge discussion point, so that's okay, keeps the public engaged in the process. With the caveat that this is not adopted, that language isn't appropriate, there's a public process to go through, third and fourth reading to go through, so is there a second? Seconded by Councillor Fryer. On the motion, I'll call the question, all those in favor, opposed, motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone, are we done? Thank God. No, we're done here, this is still lots of conversation to go. Why don't we take a 2-minute break, and we're gonna come back to the affordable housing update.
Okay, we are back with the affordable housing update. Gary Buxton, take it away.
Thank you. General Manager here at the district. I'll walk council briefly as I can, through where we're at with the affordable housing programme. We've made the project development funding grant application to BC Housing. We've had some positive signs that we expect to get back a response within weeks. And that'll give us the design fees on the Buckley Avenue project, on that apartment and townhouse project that you've seen previously, and I'll come to later. We're waiting on a project development and needs analysis grant with CMHC. We're not likely to hear before April on that. We heard that the funding for 2017 has been consumed, so it's likely a few months before we get a response on that grant application. That's simply really a detailed needs analysis, which we don't really have, to be honest. And then our consultant, Makola, continues to work on policy and structure. The structure is around a corporation or an entity, arm's length, to manage and do asset management around properties that programs would operate in. And the policies that they're working on are largely two, one of which is coordination of all affordable housing activities within the municipality. So it might be fee waivers, levy waivers, it might touch on taxation issues. Paying attention. All of those assets. Oh, she is. All of those parts that we have at disparate parts in disparate policies, bringing those together under an umbrella policy, and then really an operational administrative policy about who's the eligible population and under what circumstances and how we're going to handle the people that we house in the projects that we manage. So there are two separate policy issues. Quickly on some background, the Housing Task Force, its objectives were to increase housing supply across the continuum. The strategy that focused on was really on affordable rental and modest market sectors of the spectrum, so in that sort of middle part, and I'll show you a graphic. At the bottom, it was indirect action will support the supply and provision of subsidised and social housing, which we've come to understand as core needs by other organisations. So principally we're focusing on delivery in the rental and modest market sector, supporting others in the core needs sector. In terms of the recommendations, there are a number. The CAC policy is in progress, it's coming back to you within weeks. The Housing Stakeholder Group has really turned out to be the Integrated Housing Solutions Group that we meet monthly. We're working closely with them. In terms of resourcing a housing coordinator, that's really in the 2018 budget, there's 71,000 that'll fund not necessarily a position, it's not specific, it's either a coordinator or the establishment of this housing corporation or entity. That's not going to be Makola in the long term. They're going to help us to determine how that money is best spent, whether it's sort of internally or externally through a corporation. The lands issue has been dealt with somewhat in the real estate facilities strategy. The supporting and social housing programs, we work with the Integrated Housing Solutions Group. Aging in place and seniors, we have an application in front of us that Council will be processing in the coming months. Short-term rental housing policy is likely to be starting on that in 2018. There's a couple that we have no active front on right now, and cooperation with the nation is an ongoing activity. We've tried to make some initial contacts both through the district and the Integrated Housing Solutions Group, and we'll continue to work on that. Maintaining market supply pretty much every Tuesday, we bring you something on that front. The revised regulations for suites and accessory dwellings, we've dealt with that in a number of bus type omnibus amendments. And incentives we will deal with later on. It's not on to do, but it's likely 2018, 2019 before we move on that. So in terms of the housing spectrum, there are a number of ways of cutting it. There are a number of graphics, the way that you can present the spectrum, but this is where we sort of oriented our direct action. So that's in the affordable entry-level market, secondary suites, depending on that. So that way of colouring the spectrum, or another way is the affordable rental through to affordable ownership. The affordable ownership will be something that we come to later. So we're sort of into that sort of just to the right-hand side of the middle of the spectrum is where we're going to focus our core activities, support others. Now, in terms of projects that are across the spectrum right now, I mean, the Helping Hands is going to cover the emergency shelters and supportive housing part of the spectrum. The seniors is the subsidised and affordable rental. Centrepoint, supportive and subsidised rental. And ours is going to fit sort of just above that. So there is quite a bit of activity across the spectrum. So it's not like there's stuff just happening in one part of the spectrum. There's activity across quite a range of the spectrum at present. In terms of an active housing market status, you can thank Kate. She's assembled these stats, but apartment rents are up. That's the red line you can see, quite substantially. The vacancy rate is stuck at or around 0. The rental backlog in Macola's best estimate is 1,700 units. So that's what we're dealing with in terms of the modest market rental. The new rental need, if we look, might be another 500 to 600 units. So the numbers aren't accurate, but it's a big number. It's a big, big number. So whether we put 80 or 120 units on, we're starting to scratch at the surface. And the core needs, again, it's substantial. It's anything from 100 to 400 units, depending on how you want to define that again. So it's significant. But say we're looking at our part of the direct action is, it's a big number that we're trying to tackle.
Is that on that side?
Yeah, it was on that side.
Go ahead.
What's the difference between rental backlog and new rental need?
The rental backlog is what Macola estimates is the current deficit in terms of rental homeowners that are paying more than 30% of their income in rent. So there's potentially 1,700 households in need.
They're paying more than 30%.
Correct.
And then new rental need is?
If we extrapolate the trends into the future, 500 to 600 more. The numbers itself, whether or not it's 1,400, 1,200 or 1,700, it's a big number.
It's a big number.
And we are in need. And that's what our direct focus is going to be on.
Yeah, thanks. We better put a population gap on things. Gary, can you go back to the picture where that all
Leave it to
that one there?
Yes, sir.
Well, when I look at this, all I want to say is good work to everybody. I mean, look at that. That should be the front page of the newspaper. That to me is incredibly good work on council and staff and everybody. I'm proud of that.
Just two not approved.
But they're there.
We're funded.
We're good going.
Or
Gary.
funded.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to temper your comment.
I'm totally impressed by that. Just totally. I think
Jason.
that's very good.
Jason?
Yeah, I was just going to say that kind of strikes me as, we're starting to really, have plans for all of these things. Because I think at the start of the term, we just knew that we had a sense that there was a problem with housing, but we didn't really have a plan to move forward. So, I mean, it is still going to take some time to actually move in that direction. But I wonder too, having those numbers in place, that will also help us to develop our policies for new master plan developments, and it kind of gives us an idea a little bit about what kind of need there is for example, lock-off rental units, and addressing some of that within the market. I hope that will help staff to you know, and council to bring that forward with new developments moving forward, so.
The detailed needs analysis is essential, in terms of numbers, and from that you can develop targets, and knowing what particular need is it in the one bedroom at $600 to $700. That sort of data is rudimentary right now, so that's what we need to develop. It's the details, but whether or not we put 80 or 180 units on the market right now, it's not going to make an appreciable impact. So.
Do you have more slides? Do you want to finish your slides?
Yes,
and then take more
I'll
questions?
quickly, so household composition, I think basically here the number of households and children seems to be a growing demand in our housing market. Household income on the bright side, we do have higher than BC averages. Now, I always like to temper income statistics. Of course, you don't know whether that's coming from employment or other income. So, but on the bright side, we are dealing with a population, individual and household incomes that at least afford us a chance at not having to dig really, really deeply for a modest market anyway. In terms of the Buckley Avenue project, it's low to moderate purpose-built rental, townhouse and apartment projects. We've been talking to the Integrated Housing Solutions Group. If we're going to incorporate core needs housing in that, it's portable rent subsidies, and then there's that sort of acronym soup there of homeless outreach programs, homeless prevention programs. Those will most likely fit better into the under one roof, but supports for independent living, rental assistance program and the housing income limits programs all will give us some assistance on getting people into this if they are eligible. So it could have a core needs component. But I say there's no ongoing operational funds or subsidy going into this project. It needs to float on its own financially. Macola thinks it does. I say the design itself is not suited to supportive housing. We're continuing to work on Buckley Avenue with the Integrated Housing Solutions Group and Cedar Sky Social Services, and partly with Vancouver Coastal Health and the Ministry of Child and MCF. I always forget that acronym.
MCFD.
That's it, yeah. There's been some interest in establishing a youth centre and a youth hub, so moving both the youth centre, so you can see the cursor, the youth centre here, moving it into the building, which would be sort of in this area, on the ground floor, but also having youth programming and other youth services there. So it's really a youth-oriented hub in the 4,000 square feet that's on the ground floor of that building. So it's a work in progress, but we'll continue to work on that concept, and will continue to do so. Going forwards, there was a housing conference in Richmond in early December when the province announced that it was going to be focusing more on this missing middle, which, call it workforce or community housing. It's between the supportive housing, which has seen a lot of support in recent years, and between the market, and it's using that, basically that 30% income metric that CMHC largely uses. And it really has an economic development support in terms of if we're going to get businesses to move here, we're going to need somewhere for folks to live that's affordable. So this emphasis on the missing middle and the entry-level modest market purpose-built rental is really sort of becoming consistent with provincial direction. And we got some good signs from BC Housing when we put our grant application in on that basis. So Buckley Avenue is only part of the solution. It's not going to solve all our problems with core needs housing and missing middle housing with this single project. So there's no ongoing funding subsidies for this Buckley project, either operationally or in the capital budget, other than we put some money aside for a contingency. It needs to be simple and successful. If we get project 1 right, there probably won't be projects 2, 3 or 4. If we get it wrong, late design changes create complexity, and that's just a dollar sign. We need to be clear that this is where we're going from the start. If we're trying to move the goalposts later down the road, it's going to get difficult. So we're going to continue to work with the Integrated Housing Solutions Group, both on design and policy, on the possibility for portable rent and income subsidies, particularly around youth that have aged out of home-based programs, and the youth hub. The next steps then are to get the project development funding for Buckley Avenue, and then choose the design and construction process. There'll be a subsequent decision for council to decide how we proceed to spend those funds, when and if we get them. The housing needs assessment, that will give us some good detailed information on which we can base our programs. And I say continued policy and program development both on this corporation or this entity, and we're working with the Integrated Housing Solutions Group about what resources they have, staffing-wise, resource-wise, that we can combine into that and create something from what's already here rather than creating something that's entirely new. And I say again, working on these two municipal policies, one is the comprehensive and one is the operational, how and who we can run these projects for. So that is it.
Everybody, Karen, Jason, Doug, Peter, Ed.
Thank you for that update. Just going back to the list of things from the Housing Task Force.
Yes.
What's been accomplished. I think that second one around having a community housing stakeholder group, and you have a question mark there. I don't think it can be that group because they represent that core and supported housing mix, not entirely, but primarily. And I think we want a broader input there because the work out of the task force was to look at higher up the continuum, and this group is really advocating for lower down on the continuum. So I think if we are going to continue with that housing stakeholder group, it would need to include people that can speak to workforce housing and First Nations housing. It would need to be broader. So I don't think we can assume that they're filling that gap if that's something we want to continue to do.
On an interim basis only, we've had some discussions about the makeup of if there's a corporation or society, the makeup of that being a broader, perhaps developer-based property management representation on that board to give it a much larger, wider spectrum of views.
And when the McCullough report comes back, I can't remember if this is part of their scope, are they looking at different ways for us to manage our land for housing? I mean, we've gotten very involved in this project, but is there other models that communities are using so that we're not driving a build, but making land available like we did for Helping Hands, or getting RFPs for people to submit what they can build on our land, or maybe setting aside land as a housing trust, land trust? I mean, are we looking at different options, or are we always going to be driving these bills?
Well, the previous report that Council got in October did provide some of those options. The decision was to initially pursue this entity corporation as the primary. The report, I've asked McCullough when they come back to provide options and not just to say, here's the solution, but to say, here's the recommended solution, here are some options. So there will be alternatives.
Okay, thank you.
Jason?
On that issue, yeah, I think once we get further along, community land trust, we got to put that on the table for sure. I think that's a good long-term solution from what I understand. The question I had was around just the CMHC bullet point. I'm wondering if there was any feedback from McCullough or staff. I know in that housing task force, it was a very specific ask from some developers who had tried to initiate rental-only construction, but were stymied by the fact that CMHC still doesn't consider Squamish to be a robust rental market. And I think it's just due to their lack of data on purpose-built rentals. And so I'm wondering if we can get some feedback from them, because I think it's it might be a situation where we may just want a short little background on it, a couple paragraphs, and then we as a council write to the federal minister responsible and our MP just to ask them to look into it and to really sort of put some political weight behind that so that we're on their radar and maybe they can advance that further in their work plan so that we're not, because my understanding from the developers is that if they were able to access, if CMHC has some funds, that gives some good borrowing rates, which in turn allows them to produce something that's viable in the market, that's not super expensive. So if there's any kind of quick wins on that, and even sometime just this year for us to dash that off, I think that would be great, because my understanding is that much like the way the province has been moving, even the federal government, as they reconsider their involvement in the housing file, they're going to be moving probably towards, again, these portable rent subsidy type things. And so I think it's incumbent upon us as a municipality to make sure that the rental stock is there, and that it will be available, but recognizing that it doesn't have to all be subsidized, because there will be these rent subsidies allocated from other levels of government. So I think that's coming. The federal government mused about it. I think it'll probably be part of their election campaign in the next 2 years, so it's still a few years off. But if we get ourselves sort of, building that supply in the meantime, then that will probably be helpful.
Thanks. Doug?
Thanks. Just slightly off topic, but just going back to the previous discussion we had about completing precursors, at what point would we consider that the affordable housing strategy is complete? To tick off that particular precursor?
To be honest, I noted that and I think that policy needs to read affordable housing policy, and I think that the two policies that we get or develop in the coming year will be the policy work that council needs.
That's the McCullough one.
Yeah, Macaulay will give us sort of a draft outline. They'll give us, I hesitate to say, but a boilerplate of what it could cover. It won't solve all of the problems, because that's got to come back to council to hash through those issues. But I think if there's a comprehensive affordable housing policy and this admin operational policy, then I think those are the two things really that get a real solid foundation. And I think at that point we will be able to say that precursor is sufficiently completed.
Thank you.
Pete?
A couple of my questions have been answered, but on line 9, the cooperation with Squamish Nation, I'm just wondering how that's going, what the extent of that is.
Well, we made an initial contact with the nation in the fall when McCullough started to get rolling, but of course they've been through their election, so it's been very difficult to get connections and feedback from the nation while they've been going through that, and now they're sort of starting to ramp up the new administration. So I think we'll start to make some connections and progress in the coming months, but it's been very difficult, as it would be for us during an election cycle, to move things forward.
I appreciate the report, and it's gratifying to see some of this actually becoming tangible finally, and addressing a massive problem that we had. I mean, it caught us with our pants down, so to speak, so it's nice to see we're getting caught up, albeit it's, as you said, it's somewhat a drop in the bucket. At least it's something you can grasp and actually see a result for, so.
Yes.
Exciting.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, I think it's fabulous. I think you guys did a fabulous job. To number 10, maybe off topic a hair, but in the last 4 years I've seen developments come and get approved and not get built. And so I'm driving around thinking, what's going on with those guys? I mean, they got the permit 2 years ago, so, and I've heard different scenarios as to why people may want to just rezone, and then they realize the price is going up, so they don't build. Do those DPs run out in a timeline like 2 years if they don't build?
Yes.
Yes,
they expire after 2 years of inactivity.
Yeah, that's good. And then the other thing is, in thinking along these lines, we may want to have incentives for development to go as fast as possible. And I know we have incentives for all sorts of stuff. you know, you look at some of the 80 plexes and 40 plexes and all these things that are planned, and they're just taking so long for these guys to get started on them. I don't know. Anyway, and could you just go back, Gary, to that one where you showed all the numbers where we needed, how many units we needed? Right there. 1,700 units.
Again, these are not accurate numbers, they are best estimates from data that's not
Okay.
robust, but it's a big number.
1,000 units.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't like putting the brakes on anything when I see that. And that really makes me nervous. And people say to me, some people say to me, oh, the price is so high because there's nothing on the market. And that's, you know, I hear that from professors and talk shows on CBC where they have big talk shows, and I just have to think we should be listening to that a little bit.
So I have a number of concerns with this project. It doesn't mean I'm opposed to the project, but my biggest concern is the funding of it and being tied to building a project and having to keep the rents at an adequate level despite the amount of rental units and supply that will be coming online later on, which will reduce the rents. Right now you can get a 3-bedroom brand new townhouse apartment building for $2,500. So I appreciate this, but the market supply is increasing all the time. And as Ted said, if we don't build it, it's going to stay like this. One of my concerns is youth housing. We still don't have a plan for youth. And I know this project isn't meant to address everything. Can you back to the list? Another concern is that all these projects are mostly in the downtown. We are continuing to put projects up that are affordable housing projects.
I'm sorry, can I just ask which projects you're talking about?
Go back, the pictures that were put up before.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay, so
The last one.
the one for emergency, so. okay.
Social housing projects.
The
and
supportive
those-
housing one?
Well, supportive housing, seniors housing,
All of them, okay.
all of them.
Okay, sorry.
They're all downtown. And, you know, mixed use density and having I would see moving, if we had a housing authority in place years ago, and I know this is lamenting, but we're still moving forward without a housing authority, we aren't able to accept units, and we can ask for units, but we still have no way to manage units. And we are looking at housing projects and only accepting 4% and finding that accessible. Whistler's Housing Authority, 15%. They demand of every project that every project contain 15% affordable housing. And that can be anywhere on the spectrum of housing, but what it does is it mixes density in projects already being built. I would totally love to see this land come up to see what else we can achieve with having a developer build this project for us with mixed density. Maybe we could achieve the same amount of units and ground floor space if we gave the land away and added density. Maybe it'd be less units, but it wouldn't be all affordable housing in one place at one time. So I just worry about the model that actually works in communities is having mixed income housing. What we're looking at is one-off projects to resolve immediate emergencies instead of looking at a long-term housing project. And I'm worried about taking on a mortgage as our rents are dropping. If we still have to charge $2,000 or $2,500 for a 3-bedroom apartment in order to make our mortgage, that doesn't allow us to actually lower the prices as our market changes. It fixes our income to a very specific amount in order to not burden the community with taxes. So otherwise we are putting, maintenance and everything else, long-term maintenance fees, and having the rent be set at what we need to pay our mortgage. I need to see more on the financial budget.
There were a lot of things. There was mixed income housing stuff, inclusionary zoning stuff, percentages. I think that's a really valuable conversation about the percentage of any new development. What's our goal? And I think, personally, I think we need to ramp that up. Housing authority, where are we? I mean, a lot of the stuff that we're implementing now won't be built for 2 years. It takes it long to build. What's our strategy in terms of being able to manage that? in the interim and in the long term. What else was there in there?
Youth housing.
Youth housing, I think our collaboration, and the Housing Task Force talks about it pretty clearly, I'll look to Jason to correct me if I'm wrong, in that there are some things that we are a collaborative partner in trying to get, and there's some things that we're leading. Is that fair enough to say? And that, and certainly, you know, we were a collaborative partner in the Home Instead, we've been a collaborative partner in the Centerpoint Development. So any of these social services ones, we want to be a collaborative partner. So we need to be a collaborative partner in that gap that's missing. We're not necessarily the lead driver of it, but we need to be a collaborative partner.
And not necessarily this project either. I'm not
No,
looking
it's
for
just
this
making
project to
sure it's
solve
in the,
everything. Exactly.
in the, so we had a few, so
yeah.
I'm just trying to boil it down to the.
If I was gonna, can I boil it down to two?
That would be great.
All of it being downtown and all of it being on one piece of land, like instead of mixed density, and the funding model. So until I actually see our funding model, where I know we can afford this in the future, and it's not
Are
gonna
we
be.
talking about the McCullough one in particular,
Yeah.
that one?
Yeah, so in terms of
That's all we can
it all being downtown is, we have very few parcels of land from which to choose from. In terms of the funding model, Ms Matthews and I are not going to come back to you unless this thing floats. So when we get a detailed construction tender, we'll know if the rents can support the funding for that project, and if it doesn't float, I'm not going to recommend that council spend a dime on this or BC Housing spend a dime if it's a money pit.
Thank you.
So,
Perfect.
Ms Matthews will be the same. So.
I would really like to see a supply demand curve with like actual, with our market housing that's coming on, as well as the rental housing projects that are being proposed, as, and the current rents that are being charged, because there is a, I have a house that's being rented out soon, and it's amazing looking at the market, how people are competing for tenants now. It's actually, there's a change coming in the market, and the rents are going lower. So as more stuff
That
gets
would be
built and
positive.
people
That would be
speculate, they rent out the
Great.
prices. I know, it's awesome. I'm happy about
It
that.
will reverse that trend.
Yes.
Well,
It's
they may
horrible
come
because
down
the
from a
speculations
ridiculously
people
high
buy
level
these
to an
are
absurdly high level.
So, okay, were both of your things answered then? And just on the downtown only, I mean, the McCullough project is, as you said, backlog is 1,700, it's not even a tenth of what we need, so it's not, there's still lots more that needs to happen.
CAC policy is coming back to you in early February that stipulates or outlines a percentage request. So that would be the spread across. And the intent is that those projects are going to take a couple of years to come together. We have to run like hell and get our housing authority or agency or corporation in place in those 2 years. That's the problem we have.
See, I actually don't see an expectation on rental within a large project as a community amenity. I see it as the bare minimum to get in the door. And it shouldn't be framed as, oh, you're doing us, you know, you're helping us. No, this is, if you have 50 to 200 or 500 or 1,000 units, X percentage is part of getting in the door. That's the bare minimum. It's not actually tied to the CAC, is the way I see it, but just put that into the hopper. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I remember discussing all the locations for this, and you know, to Sue's point about, and I appreciate the fact that you want to see it spread out around town, but I do remember all the conversations and timelines, and you know, this will be the last time I say it, I'm so impressed with the tight timelines that staff had on this, all the other work that they had, and we're getting this moving forward. Now to the rents, and I sat on the seniors board downtown for years ago. The interesting thing about the rents is, you know, 20 years goes by and those buggers are paid for. They're paid for. Now all of a sudden the community has an income, and they can go to another piece of property and take the income from those 20, whatever it is, so you got 60 units.
This is
And
the
then
land
all of a sudden
developer.
you
Yeah,
go,
exactly. They have a land reserve, that's the only reason.
But it's a
they do it.
fabulous start, is what I'm saying. I'm just so impressed about that.
Thanks. Karen?
I just wanted to reiterate what the mayor said. I think we should start establishing inclusionary zoning to some level as business as usual. And then the CAC says if you offer more than that, that could be counted as a community amenity contribution. But I think there's a certain level where it's just, that's what we do now because everybody in the Lower Mainland has a housing crunch. So I kind of like to see.
And it's about housing security, not just housing crunch.
Yeah.
Jason?
Yeah, I'm in the same sort of vein for large projects. Again, it has to be threshold. I know we talk about this a lot, but to me, the sort of CAC policy for small infill developments, to me, would still have that sort of cash in lieu option, which again can go to the Affordable Housing Reserve and help us meet our objectives. Because I think that's a lot more effective than having a developer just build like one covenanted unit and have it all spread out. So, but I agree, you know, we should just, especially for a master plan large developments, we just, let's set the percentage, and we're setting it at rental. We're not saying that, you know, it's still be market rental, you know, and then we can talk about what the non-market side looks like.
Ted, and then we're gonna move on.
Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, please. We do have policy in place to require performance now, don't we? Didn't we pass that a little while ago?
Require
Performance?
Pro formas?
Yeah.
No, we don't have a policy to that.
But we do have it so that we can request that from a development. I'm sure we changed it just a little while ago. Well, we better get that in place. Because I thought we did because of the one across from the brew pub. I thought we were looking at possibly, you know, ones that have, you know, go double their existing zoning and density. And, you know, like what we're talking about, saying percentages of units going rental, blah, blah, blah. I mean, some developments may require even higher than that if they're tripling the value of their site with us rezoning something. And I know we did have a discussion about the performance, and I really think it would be a really handy tool to have in some cases.
Okay, you weren't looking for specific direction, this was just to make sure the conversation's moving, we know where progress is happening. So what, just in terms of the future, Gary, what can we expect next and when? Maybe I missed that.
Sorry, I'll skip to the last. Oh dear.
You are.
So next is a decision on how we're going to proceed, when and if we get funding from BC Housing, is how we're going to proceed with the Buckley Avenue project. Is it design build, or are we going to hold the design, do the design and then tender that as a separate? There are some options as to how we want to approach that. We need to confirm with CMHC Housing on the needs and assessment grant, and then Macola are continuing to work on, say, these two-pronged or three-pronged, establishing the framework or shell for this corporation or entity or housing authority of some name, and then the policies, the comprehensive affordable housing policy and the operational administrative housing policies. I may have a timeline for delivery on Thursday from the Macola office.
From my point of view, apologies. Thank you. We need to make sure that we are ahead of the housing authority imperative. As things come on, as we know things are going to be built and we start to actually accumulate product that we need to manage, and we need to make sure that we're ahead of that, so we're not all of a sudden going, no, we don't know. So I want to make sure that that is firmly in place and accounted for in budgets, and we understand what that means. So I just wanted to put a bit of a imperative on that one. I think it's really important for us to get our housing authority ducks in order, so we're ready to go when we need to go.
So
and I could be argued
priority number
last
one
year,
is to get the Buckley Avenue project rolling, and priority number two is to get the corporation rolling, or at least thought in a conceptual.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Motion to close, moved by Karen, seconded by Peter. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.